of Europe, lie very much on the security and control of Greenland. So if Denmark and other European countries continue to double down on this approach to oppose President Trump's move over Greenland, this will be a backfiring move. They are shooting themselves in the foot, and this will open up further openings for Russia and China to tear up this Western division, this Western unity. Of course, they've done so now, and of course the openings have been created in terms of sowing these divisions. And we've seen how the statement by Macron to have more Chinese investments and Chinese presence in certain areas, certain sectors. And of course, this is again, is for their own security in the future, and they have failed to do that. And now is the time to ensure that the capable power is given the responsibility to safeguard this important, important geographical area in Greenland for the betterment of both parties.
Thank you for highlighting that, and please stay with us, Mr. Keith, and for the next news. We have a breaking news. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa have voiced concerns over President Trump's Greenland ambitions. Von der Leyen has warned that Europe needs its own power levers in a world defined by raw power. Costa has emphasized that the EU must defend its rights against coercion and criticized Trump's tariff threats. Both leaders have stressed the importance of NATO collaboration for Arctic security and maintaining international law. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Collins Chongyu Keith. He joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Mr. Keith, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, as a lot of statements come in, strong statements indeed, coming from European leaders about protecting Greenland. Do you think that there could have been any other way that Trump could have raised alarm over the strategic or importance of Greenland?
Well, he has done so since last year. I believe that the diplomatic team, led by Rubio, has again expressed the intent to portray the urgency of the matter, the importance of Greenland, not only to the United States but to Europe as a whole. And of course, also those efforts have failed. There have been the European powers, especially Denmark, have been adamant in protecting the status quo. And hence we have seen how the new measures in place, the new messaging narratives from President Trump that one way or the other, Greenland will have to be under the control of Washington. And again, of course, we have seen how despite all these efforts to portray this the need for Europe to keep Greenland, all these have failed. And despite the option to also use the tariff cut as a retaliation to President Trump's tariff, as I've stated, this will fail also because Europe is also being trapped now by economic pressure internally, as well as the of course the dependence on the US in almost all areas. So this will fail, and of course Europe can't match the hard power capacity of the United States. And so seeing all these options on the table, so I don't see any way out for Europe to double down on its stand, unless the ultimate aim is to, of course, to welcome with open arms the increased presence of Russia and China. And I don't see this happening. It's not to the benefit of Europe as a whole, and the risks are far higher for Europe to do so, because by doing that, President Trump might just pull out from NATO, and that alone will spell doom for Europe in terms of the overall future security. And and just with this hardened stance over Greenland, by defending the status quo, Europe is risking itself to be to have an obsolete NATO, to have also a drawback, a withdrawn United States from the security umbrella of Europe, and you'll be exposed now to Russia. And of course also this will spell further doom for Europe, as I've stated, and it's not worth it for that to happen. And they have to look at the bigger picture as to how these power calculations will move forward. And some might have hope for a possible post-Trump era where things might be reversed. I don't see that happening also. So this is a critical timeline, not to jump to the bandwagon, and not to seize the opening to to show this hardened stance against President Trump, and I don't see a happy ending for Europe should it choose that path.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keith Collins, for sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Prince Harry and other high-profile claimants, including Sir Elton John and Liz Hurley, have accused the publisher of the Daily Mail and Mail of unlawful information gathering over a 20-year period. They alleged that grave breaches of privacy, claiming the publisher used private investigators and Blagan to gather stories between 1993 and 2018. Defending the publisher, Anthony White KC has argued that the journalists provided a compelling account of legitimate sourcing. He claimed the celebrities had leaky social circles, dismissing the allegations of a pattern of misconduct. Among the claimants are actors Liz Hurley and Sadie Frost and former MP Sir Simon Hughes. The lawsuit is expected to last 9 weeks at the Royal Courts of Justice. Now we move on to another news. Britain has approved China's plan to build its largest embassy in Europe in London. Despite concerns over possible spying, the embassy will be located near the Tower of London at the historic Royal Mint Court site. The approval comes after years of political pressure, with some opposition from local residents, lawmakers, and security officials who warned it could ease Chinese espionage efforts. The new embassy will be significantly larger than China's current site in London, spanning about 55,000 square meters. Despite these concerns, the UK government hopes the move will improve relations with Beijing, particularly ahead of a visit by UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer to China this month. Let's listen into what Goh Jiakun, Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson, has shared. Now we welcome back Mr. Collins Chong-Yu-Keith. He's a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Mr. Collins, for staying with us. Now looking at this, thank you. And looking at this, how significant is that, regardless of sounding alarms over espionage chances and the amount of how many gray zones or unclarified zones this initial project or this project map had, why do you think China has, or why do you think UK has approved this?
Well, Britain is facing, a strategic dilemma here to, of course, the need to balance ties with China. And, of course, also we've seen this bandwagoning options and approaches, not only by the UK, but by Canada, by South Korea, to have these fallback options, whereas this friend-shoring dependence options also for these powers, also as a way out for the tariff measures. But also at the same time, they have to confront the rising risk of, not only espionage, but this increased Chinese presence right in the, on the soil of the UK. So this reflects a broader European pattern, the risk awareness, and without so decisive pushback, how to strategically balance the risk and the potential need to portray this new opening to China. And as we know, this will be China's largest embassy in Europe, and size itself also carries significance on its own in terms of also the options to have bigger staffing density, personnel, tech infrastructure, and of course the sheer proximity to this important sites in London. So of course we have seen how the UK is part of the Five Eyes intelligence network, and this is extremely crucial and sensitive, and we've seen how cooperation still remains intact, but the trust factor, the calibration of trust among different Five Eyes partners, including New Zealand, Australia, and the US. Of course, we've seen now frictions between President Trump also with the recent move by the UK on the decision on Diego Garcia also. So all this have exposed, and of course with the recent issue on Greenland, and this has exposed the fragility of the transatlantic ties, and also the need for Britain to balance the importance of ties between London and Washington and London and Beijing. And of course this is part of the broader playbook by Beijing also to test the waters, to send a strategic signaling and messaging to not only to London but to other European capitals, and of course to Washington, that again, as I've argued, despite the moves, despite the containment moves by the US, and despite the move in Greenland, China still retains the leverage in terms of the potential to have this to sow divisions, to have this new fallback options, and to have these renewed ties with traditional allies of the US, including the UK, including Canada, including South Korea and the like. So again, and of course with France. So this is another strategic vulnerability for the UK, but it's not surprising because of the current timeline of the move in Greenland now.
Thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Collins. Please stay with us as we take the bite of Chinese Foreign Affairs spokesperson. Now let's listen into.
为外交馆舍建设提供支持和便利是东道国的国际义务。中国驻英国使馆新馆舍规划设计是一个高质量的方案，申请及获批完全遵循国际外交惯例及当地的法规及程序。
Now we welcome back Mr. Collins Chongyuki. Thank you very much, Mr. Collins, for staying with us. Now, as you were highlighting the trust factor, also, how do you think this UK-China relationship looks like, in particularly now that Keir Starmer is going to be visiting? Do you think this is a strategic move by UK, as they know that he would need some kind of leverage as he visits China?
Surely the same move has been done by Canada, by Mark, as well as by Lee of South Korea. We have seen how all these have strategic intent to have these credible fallback options, also to send a subtle message to the US that despite the conventional strong ties, all these countries have the options also to enhance ties at the same time in parallel with China. So, and of course also this, as I've stated, this is a crucial timeline now with regards to what is happening now in Greenland, and this may be potentially frosty ties now from now on with in terms of London and Washington ties, and of course Starmer will use this opening to present a new way forward for London-Beijing ties now, especially in economic fronts. We have seen how the UK is also under increasing economic strain and economic pressure. They need to secure greater supply chain strategic sectors, and of course also to expand the market and the access, of course, and also as a strategic bulwark against potential further economic uncertainties now with regards to Greenland. So all these have been on the central timeline, the central factors weighing on the minds of Starmer, and how also to ensure that his domestic approval ratings are being kept, being maintained. And of course, this has been again a subtle playbook by London to navigate these increasingly complex ties now with Washington and Beijing. And let's not forget also about what Ukraine has to offer also in terms of this entire equation here, and how this visit might also involve the need for to showcase UK's greater power presence, greater diplomatic presence and symbol. Yes. And of course also I think this will be used to pressure Starmer will ask President Xi to play a greater role now for the peace agreement in Ukraine, as what President Trump has played before this. So all in all, we've seen how Starmer is keen to project a new way forward and a newfound power presence of the UK in Europe and across the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins Chongyuki, for joining us today and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. South Korean court has sentenced former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo to 23 years in jail for the charges including engaging in a key action of insurrection concerning former President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law in December of 2024. According to reports, the Seoul Central District Court has found Han guilty because he was considered instrumental in setting up the outward appearance of a cabinet meeting that facilitated the martial law declaration. However, the lower court has also found Han guilty of related charges such as perjury and creating false document, and Han had denied wrongdoing for all charges except partial perjury. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He's a journalist at the Korea Herald, joins us live from Seoul. Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay, for joining us. Good to see you. Now looking at this, how significant is this?
It was expected to be ruled out, and today, ruling out the possibility of delaying the justice, the court has announced the verdict, and people were expecting that something sort of this would come out. And the court has recognized in its ruling that it was an insurrection and the role of Han Duck-soo was there. So according to the, under a criminal act of Article 87, he is likely to be brought to books, and he is going to face this 23 years of imprisonment. So this is the overall situation today.
Right. And what political impact could this verdict have for future of South Korean politics, and how do you think politicians use their right and power moving on?
See, in South Korean politics, these kind of verdicts had been there before also. Many leaders had been imprisoned, including the presidents. But later on, after a few years, when the regime changed, when the administrations changed, somehow the apology and all these things were somehow through apologies, and many relaxations were given based on health issues and others. So that would be a future course of action. Maybe after a few years, it cannot be ruled out. But in current circumstances, when DP is in power, and especially the anger of people is lively, or at least if it is not fading away soon, no government in South Korea, the current one or the next one, would be taking this as a risk to pardon. So that is why, for Han Duck-soo, it is a very difficult time. And he has been found guilty by the court that he had a role in, undermining the constitutional order. And that is why this Article 87 has proven him guilty, and he is going to face this imprisonment.
Great. And, as you highlighted, there has been, this is not the first case that South Korea has seen of political imprisonment of political elite. Do you think that the fact that DP is in charge right now, or the current South Korean government, do you think that had any role to play in how this case has, how the verdict was given, or how serious this has been taken?
See, officially, the DP is not part of it. It is being done, this justice is being delivered as part of the Korea's legal system, the constitutional system, and the court ruling is also part of it. But the role of the political pressure cannot be, ruled out, because it is the DP and it is the politicians who saved the constitutional order, and that is why people and politicians are on one side, and the authorities of that administration are on one side. So there cannot be it cannot be denied that there is a relationship here, but the rulings are not done based on that relationship. But there will be a political chaos now. Even now also, the manner in which is being ruled out, many are saying that Han Duck-soo had not done anything, and he is becoming a kind of a scapegoat, and President Yoon should take the full responsibility, and he only should be punished. And people are anticipating it as a precedent to the to Yoon's verdict, which is about to come. He is facing 8 trials. So all these trials are going to give a very negative verdict from Yoon's standpoint. So the political circles, definitely they are going to have a lot of hue and cry from both the sides. So already Korean society is polarized, but on the case of on the issue of insurrection, the political polarization, especially in the conservative bloc, has gone passive because they want to start a fresh politics with fresh agendas. There are different agendas in politics, and they have got a new leadership also, the PPP. So that is why it would be very interesting to see how they are going to protect their leader, and especially deal with issues like Handaksu.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. Sanjay Kumar for joining us from Seoul and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our tech news. Elon Musk reposted a claim from influencer Dodge designer, alleging that ChatGPT has been linked to 9 deaths, including 5 suicides. He has urged that the people to stay away from the chatbot and advising that others to keep their loved ones away from using it. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has responded by calling out Musk's companies and citing the safety issues with Tesla's Autopilot and xAI's Grok, adding that he won't even start on Grok. Altman has said that he sharply rebuked Musk and defended ChatGPT by pointing out the complexity of safeguarding billions of users. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Trending Tech on NewsX World, where we bring you the latest tech breakthroughs and trends from around the world. Financial markets are evolving faster than ever, driven by AI, automation and high-frequency trading. Bitcoin and Ethereum EFTs are bringing crypto into the mainstream, attracting billions from institutional investors. But questions remain. Is it a legitimate asset or just speculation? Machines now make most major trading decisions, executing thousands of trades per second, shaping prices in ways humans can't. Liquidity providers and market-neutral strategies promise stability, yet flash crashes and volatility persist. Regulators are racing to build and keep up, but innovation moves faster as AI and quantum tech reshape finance. Viewers ask, who really controls the markets? People, algorithms, or power? To talk about this, and joining us now is Josh Bubar, the managing partner and COO of Velox Trading Group, where he is shaping the future of digital asset investing and high-frequency trading. Under his leadership, Velox Trading has become a top-performing quantitative investment firm and liquidity provider in crypto, managing one of the world's leading market-neutral digital asset funds. Josh has built and scaled over 40 ETFs, hedge funds and crypto products, including launching the world's first Ethereum and Bitcoin ETFs. He is recognized globally for his expertise in systemic strategies and quantitative finance, driving innovation in both traditional and digital markets. Thank you, Mr. Bubar, for joining us here on Trending Tech. It's a pleasure to have you. Right, my first question to you is from Bitcoin ETFs to AI-driven trading financial markets. They're now faster, more automated and more complex than ever. Yet most everyday investors still don't understand how these systems really work. Are modern financial markets becoming smarter or just more dangerous?
Yeah, sure. So from the investor's side, I think what's really important for them instead to consider is buying and selling. How simple can they go and transact on the current market value they see on the screen? So although that's true, financial markets might be becoming more complex as time goes on, really they're becoming more liquid and significantly more competition. In reality, it's good for everyone. So I would say less about are they becoming more dangerous and more is complexity creating more competition. Markets being more competitive is good for all investors. So really, they want to be able to buy and sell and express a view of what they see on screen at the price they're seeing. I think those factors such as new investment products on top of automated systems, I think that creates a more natural flow into the market making things significantly simpler for investors to buy and sell today.
And of course, with Bitcoin and Ethereum, if ETFs now approved and attracting billions in institutional money, crypto has moved from the fringe into the financial mainstream. Has crypto finally matured into a legitimate asset class, or is it still built on speculation?
Yeah, the crypto markets are interesting. I mean, I've been involved in them in over a decade. There's always speculation on, are they legitimate? Is it an asset class? Is it not? I think if in terms of what defines legitimacy as adoption and market activity, I mean, over a $3 trillion market cap of the asset class in US dollars, along with 2 to 3 trillion of open interest in the derivatives market. You have multiple large institutional players, even GSIB banks that are now entering the space to participate not only in trading, but around tokenization, stable coins, real world assets. I think we're at the point of well past speculation to this extent, and maybe not into maturity, but more into global understanding and adoption.
Now, HFT firms execute thousands of trades per second, shaping prices faster than any human trader ever could. Does high-frequency trading make markets more efficient, or does it give an unfair advantage to those with the fastest machines?
I think that will really depend on who you decide to ask. For larger players, as far as they're concerned, they'll get adverse pricing on much larger orders. That tends to be who usually is really wondering, hey, am I going to get a really poor trade for my client? And that's really important to them. They can happen though, however, a lot of these larger market orders, instead of fighting against the HFTs that are doing significant amount of trading, it actually benefits them. They're using that technology in order to execute trades on a more orderly manner, cheaper for their clients, which ultimately is the entire antithesis of why a market is there. You want to have a really good fill where a buyer meets a seller. For the retail, it's definitely a net benefit in my view. More activity in the market makes trading significantly more efficient for the retail because there's significantly more competition to compete for that order. They end up benefiting at scale on all this competition, even if there's a lot of negativity in the media and the press against them. So on the whole, I would see it as a net benefit to investors.
And market neutral strategies aim to make money whether markets rise or fall, even during crises. In an age of global uncertainty, is risk-free investing realistic or just smart marketing?
Well, in terms of risk-free, look, there's really no free lunch. There is risk involved, even in very risk-adverse instruments. There's risk everywhere. That's how you make a profit. Market neutral strategies are no exception to that rule. So for strategies such as like ours, what we focus on, software and counterparty risk as opposed to price risk are really the risk you're trading off and that benefit. So a lot of investors prefer that because they already have a lot of market risk. So even true, I guess, risk-free instruments, we would call them, such as US Treasury bills, although it's an extremely small risk, there is still some risk embedded in the back end of an economy, in this case, the US economy. So I would say with more global uncertainty persisting, a lot of these instruments may have relatively a higher risk than they did before, but realistically, true risk-free investments are very, very low. Market neutral strategies, though, instead, they're really focused on swapping a different set of risks for another set of risks. So not taking market risk and price risk, but instead focused on taking software risk and counterparty risk.
And liquidity providers are supposed to stabilize markets, yet flash crashes still happen in both crypto and traditional finance. Are liquidity providers protecting markets or profiting from volatility?
Yeah, liquidity providers, look, they're there until they're not. Generally speaking, they're going to be there at almost all times, but flash crashes, I think, are negatively blamed a lot of the times on liquidity providers. Realistically, that can happen for a very wide factor of reasons. Sometimes these are connected to them. Sometimes they're completely unrelated reasons, such as market structure design. I think the real question is, do they contribute to the flash crashes and volatility more than they don't? If so, I would say probably no. However, they're certainly by design going to profit off of the volatility, because volatility enhances volume, which enhances mispricings, which is really the main focus of their business, is to profit off of the orders, but they want more people to cross the spread. So at the margin, I think they're probably more of a net benefit than a net adversary in that case, but they're certainly in volatile situations. They're going to profit off of those opportunities. The real question is whether are they contributing to the creation or not.
And governments are racing to regulate crypto while firms are racing to out-innovate regulation. Does regulation protect investors or slow down financial progress?
Yeah, in my view, look, responsible regulation is a good thing. I think at scale, most different economies and jurisdictions are looking to see crypto more regulated. What's going to happen is more regulation makes easier participation. More participation in the industry is what everyone in crypto really is looking for. They want more people to use the products. But that said, crypto is also very, very unique, where capital is incredibly mobile. And moving money into new products, regardless of their geography, is really only a few clicks away. So especially in decentralized finance where there's no borders, regulation is going to be really tough around that. So it's going to have a difficult time to slow those users down if they want to go and use other products. So do I think it's good? Yes, I think it's great. Do I think it's going to try to slow things down? Yes. However, I think it's going to be very difficult for the most innovative areas of crypto.
And most major trading decisions today are made by algorithms, not people. Should machines be trusted with the world's money?
Well, I would say the machines still have humans that have made and created the decision parameters. So there's still people behind how those trades are occurring, although they're getting executed based on a preset conditions and orders that someone has designed. I think that really changes when trading starts to occur with no human input whatsoever. And I'm sure that's going to happen to a degree. I'm sure that happens somewhat today. I just don't think we're there as of yet. That's a question to definitely revisit in 4 or 5 years, when a lot of large language models are now powering trades completely autonomously. For the time being, most of the trading is still occurring with a human-based input. So I think that question is not yet to be determined.
And AI, automation and quantum computing are set to reshape finance once again. Will future markets be more fair or more opaque?
I think if technology is going to enable more people to participate with less friction, that's always going to be a net positive. It's a marketplace. This is what make markets great. We want more people to participate in the market. That's a net benefit for everybody. I think the real question is when these people are trading, if it's recognized within the order book, meaning everyone can see that they're trading all in the same venue in the same place, or is it going to be elsewhere? If all of the AI, if all of quantum computing, if automation reshapes finance that everyone still sees what everyone else is trading and not looking at your order in a negative way, but more everyone comes to the same venue, the same marketplace to participate. I think that's going to make things actually more transparent. It's going to make things actually more fair. If it's going to be off of exchanges in different markets we call dark markets, I think that could change the quantum a fair amount, and then that's the real question to be had.
And finally, finance, of course, now runs at machine speed, global scale and enormous influence. Who really controls the future of the financial system? People, algorithms, or power?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think today, ultimately, humans still control the machines, the inputs to the machines that are trading. And a marketplace is still, if you think about it, a group of people expressing a view on a company, a commodity, a contract, a cryptocurrency. Down the road, if that changes and machines are now making the decision, again, in the world of large language models, if they're making decisions completely on their own, I'm sure that's going to happen. Algorithms are then going to be a much more critical player in the financial system. Personally, I'm really excited to see how that's going to potentially change the market. But today, I think there's still a lot of human input and design that goes into the decisions being made. I think that's going to dramatically change in 5 years. And again, quite excited to see how that's going to look.
Thank you very much, Mr. Josh Bubar, for joining us on this episode of Trending Tech and sharing your insights. But with that, it is a wrap on this episode. For more tech updates and innovations, stay tuned on NewsX World.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous, and in the high stakes of theatre of global diplomacy, some territories are viewed as sacred sovereign lands, but in the worldview of the Trump administration, they are strategic assets waiting for the right handshake. Today we explore a transatlantic drama that has moved from the fringes of social media to the front lines of NATO. On January the 20th, the push for the American acquisition of Greenland reached a fever pitch. President Donald Trump has once again declared that the world's largest island is not just for sale, it is a national security necessity. And this time he claims NATO is starting to listen. Just hours ago, President Trump took to Truth Social to reveal a very good telephone call with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. The topic, Greenland. Trump stated, and I quote, Greenland is imperative for national and world security. There can be no going back. On that, everyone agrees. But is there really an agreement, or is this the sound of NATO allies quietly bowing to pressure to avert a trade war? The battleground has now shifted to the Swiss Alps. Trump has confirmed that he will meet with various parties at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week to discuss the acquisition. Diplomats suggest that the Trump administration is using a carrot and a stick approach, the carrot being a seat at the table of a new Arctic security order and the stick being staggering tariffs. To understand why Trump is pushing so hard now, we have to look at his recent attack on the United Kingdom. Trump posted a scathing critique of London's decision to cede sovereignty of Diego Garcia to Mauritius. He called it, quote, an act of great stupidity and total weakness. Trump argues that China and Russia only recognize strength, likening the UK's move to a security collapse that the US cannot afford to repeat in the Arctic. For Trump, Greenland is the antidote to British weakness, and he has bluntly stated that Denmark cannot protect the territory and therefore the US must step in. So how is NATO responding? We are seeing a fascinating shift. Over the weekend, 8 NATO allies, including Germany, France and the Nordic nations, deployed troops to Greenland for an exercise tilted, quote-unquote, Arctic endurance. While Trump initially called this a dangerous game, European diplomats are reframing the move. Reports indicate that NATO leaders are now publicly praising Trump's focus on Arctic security. By increasing their own military presence on the island, they are trying to prove to Washington that they can secure the northern flank without surrendering sovereignty. But in doing so, they are effectively adopting Trump's rhetoric that the Arctic is under imminent threat from Russia and China. Now let's break down the impacts of this real estate diplomacy. First, the tariff threat. Trump has threatened a 10% tariff on Danish and European goods starting on February the 1st, rising to 25% by June unless a deal for Greenland is struck. This has sent shockwaves through European markets, leaving leaders scrambling to appease Washington. Second, the erosion of sovereignty. By discussing the acquisition of an autonomous territory at a corporate summit like Davos, the Trump administration is redefining diplomacy as a series of land deals rather than treaties between equals. However, the people of Greenland are not remaining silent. In Nuuk, the capital, protests have erupted with banners reading "Make America Go Away." The Greenlandic Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen has stated firmly that the island chooses Denmark over the US, but the economic pressure from Washington is making that choice increasingly expensive for Copenhagen. In Davos itself, demonstrations against Trump have been going for the last couple of days, with protesters particularly angry about the warm welcome the US president is receiving. The general view among these people is that NATO leaders are moving to appease Trump because they can't keep up with his unprecedented rhetoric. The Greenland standoff is no longer a sideshow, it is a test of the transatlantic alliance. In Trump's global order, sovereignty has a price, and the Arctic is the newest frontier for a chairman who believes every base, every island, and every nation has a valuation. Joining us now to discuss this is Ben Aris, a former Moscow bureau chief. He joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. NATO Secretary General here, Mark Rutte, has characterized his recent talks with President Trump as very good, and several allies are praising Trump's focus on the Arctic. Do you see this as a genuine strategic alignment, or is it NATO engaging in a desperate appeasement strategy?
The latter. NATO is nominally an alliance of some 30 countries, including all the European ones. However, in practice, it's largely an extension of the US military policy overseas, and that it forms the backbone of the NATO's power is US military power. And that without participation or cooperation with the US, then NATO becomes a bit of a wet squib, a bit of an empty paper bag. And so Rutte is very conscious of that. And so he and his job and his effective power at the head of that military organization is all dependent on keeping Trump on board. And at the same time, on the other side of the fence, Trump's made it very clear that he's not willing to bankroll European security, and that the whole Article 5 thing is being undermined because he's introduced enough uncertainty that should, for example, Russia march into the Baltics, which are a military member of NATO, that America would not come to their defense. The collective security guarantee, Article 5, is in doubt now. And I think that's the problem for everyone here, is that the international apparatus of security in Western Europe, backed by the US, is falling to pieces. And that's a big problem for Europe in general, because they're warning repeatedly that Russia's going to, quote, be ready to invade Europe sometime in the next 5 years. But without the US backing them up, then the Russian army at the moment, there's 1 million men under arms. The Russians are outproducing the whole of the EU combined in terms of weapons and ammo, and that they would be defenseless. And without American help, they would be pushed to repulse such an attack.
And Ben, of course, the T word has been brought into this conversation a couple of days ago. We're seeing a 10% to 25% tariff ultimatum linked directly to a land acquisition. In the history of modern foreign policy, have we ever seen a major power use its domestic trade policy as a siege engine to acquire territory from a formal military ally?
Well, like you suggested in your preamble, I mean, the whole international order has fallen to pieces. That we're supposed to be treated, Europe, America as partners, because we have been ever since the Second World War, and building this unified world based on values, etc. And what we're seeing here is that Trump has totally abandoned that model, and he's been called transactional. But what he's doing here is he's taking economic tools like tariffs and using them for effectively military purposes to annex territory that doesn't belong to the states. And that's in total violation of the UN Charter. It's worse than anything that Putin's been doing, because he's then going on to put these charges on Europe. I mean, personally, I think you have to think of Trump as simply as a deal maker, and he's taking what tools he has in the box, and tariffs is one that he can hit Europe over the head. That 20% of Europe's exports goes to the States. It's by far the largest economic partner that Europe has, and is the biggest trade partnership in the world. And so these tariffs are hugely damaging to Europe if they were imposed. And it's a threat. It's a negotiating position, because Trump famously, Taco, he always chickens out. That he threatens these tariffs, and then they go into protracted negotiations, and some sort of deal comes out of it. And in the case of Russia, he's repeatedly threatened tariffs. In China, he's repeatedly threatened tariffs, and none of them have been put in place because it's a negotiating position to get what he wants. The difference this time is not about trade, as it was in Europe and China's situation. It's about the annexation of somebody else's country. And that's a whole new kettle of fish. This is a whole new game that he's playing.
And Ben, today he made some statements and he cited the UK's deal with Mauritius over Diego Garcia as a catalyst for the Greenland acquisition. Do you think he's right now to view the surrender of overseas territories and military bases as a systemic act of weakness that invites rivals like China into the Atlantic? Is this the new world order that we're living in now?
The Chinese came out yesterday and said, please, Mr. Trump, stop using this fake China threat as a justification of your selfish goals. It's invented. I mean, China has no aspirations on Greenland, neither does Russia. In fact, for Russians, this is now an issue because they had no problem with Greenland, which is on their northern border too, not very far away. And now you're talking about putting, quote unquote, NATO or American troops building up inside Greenland on Russia's northern border. And this was exactly the objection they had to the proposal that Ukraine would join NATO, because then again, that would be Western missiles, that time on the western border. So what Trump's done is created a strategic problem, a security threat to Russia where none existed. And this is obviously going to bring a reaction on the Russian side if they go ahead with it. So the idea is a bad one from start to finish, because it just destabilizes an already unstable world.
And by moving these negotiations to the World Economic Forum in Davos, the administration is treating the Arctic like a corporate merger. What are the long-term risks of shifting the resolution of territorial disputes from the
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that
Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. According to New Zealand police statements, authorities have ordered evacuations across low-lying parts of New Zealand's North Island after heavy rain and strong winds caused flooding, landslides and road closures, with police confirming man is missing after being swept away with his vehicle, while National Forecaster Service has issued life-threatening weather warnings. Spain's Foreign Minister José Manuel Albares has said that New Delhi and Spain that a historic India-EU free trade deal is likely to be concluded within days, with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen expected in India ahead of the January 27 summit to finalize the details, while India and Spain also discuss stronger defense ties. China has begun emergency food aid to Cuba, with the first shipments of rice arriving as the island faces worsening food and fuel shortages after Venezuelan oil supplies were halted amid tightened U.S. sanctions. Furthermore, Beijing will send a total of 30,000 tons of rice under the new aid program. China has condemned a suicide attack on a Chinese restaurant in Kabul that has killed at least 7 people, including 1 Chinese national and 6 Afghans, with Foreign Ministry spokesperson Goh Jia-kun saying Beijing made urgent representations, while ISIS-K claimed responsibility for the attack as the investigations by Taliban continues. Mohammad Nidal al-Shar has met with India's Charge d'Affaires Venu Yadav in Damascus to push for stronger trade, investment and economic cooperation, including expanding joint coordination and boosting bilateral exchange. Amid the escalation between NATO and the US over Greenland, President Trump has again slammed NATO, saying he has saved the alliance from the ash heap of history. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has reaffirmed his country's support for Greenland and Denmark's sovereignty at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Venezuela's National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez has announced broad reforms in the laws amid the new political context following the capture of Nicolas Maduro by the U.S. military operation earlier this month. Now for this hour, we start with EU. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen has issued a stark warning regarding growing tensions between Europe and the United States over Greenland, stressing that such disputes could embolden adversaries of the West. Speaking in Strasbourg on Wednesday, von der Leyen has condemned President Donald Trump's threat to impose tariffs on European allies, labeling the move wrong. She has emphasized that any escalation of conflicts among allies would only benefit rivals, whom the West is working hard to keep out of the strategic landscape. She has also conveyed a clear message that Europe is fully prepared to act with unity, urgency, and determination should the situation worsen. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao, for joining us. Now, as disputes and between, Greenland and not just Greenland, but over Greenland continue, do you think that the rift between NATO and some allies of Greenland and US was always there, or do you think this has just it's new?
It is interesting part because anyway, the people talk about the alliance of the NATO, but NATO is more than half of the military powers came from the United States. NATO rely on the United States. So that's why the meaning of NATO is the US improves the security in Europe. So military power itself hasn't changed if something the rift has happened between US and Europe. But that is the reality. But at the same time, it is also true that the alliance is facing the problem is beneficial for the enemy. So in this case, the remark of the EU side is true, I believe. But this Greenland issue has three aspects, and now both US and Europeans need to adjust that situation, which is firstly, of course, security. View from the security, Greenland is important now, and how to deal with this matter. Because, for example, the nuclear missile came from Russia, Kola Peninsula, crossing the Greenland, or the Arctic trade route is opening, and the submarine route to the eastern coast of the America is crossing the Greenland, Iceland, British, and now is the age of rare earths, and there are many rare earths. But big the island, but only the 50,000 population. It means that no one is taking this kind of resources or territories. That is true. So view from this, security is very important. That is one thing. But another thing is America try to re-establish their influence in the American continent, and Greenland is part of the America, they think. So new type of the Monroe Doctrine, Europe should not intervene in the American continent. In this case, Greenland is part of it, America start to think. So that is one problem, but at the same time, the view from the American history, this is a common way. Firstly, the dominating America, after that, expanding influence to the others. So that's why they start to make America great again. Start from American continent is understandable view from the history. But third aspect we cannot forget is this is right versus left. In these 8 countries send the troops to Greenland, of course 1 to the 15, not big military, try to contribute the security of the Greenland to sharing burden with the United States. But this attitude is the problem because this is part of America, the American thing, and another reason is all of the 8 countries is led by the left or middle governments. There is no far-right government or right government. So because despite President Trump believes that they are the so-called far-right side, so that's why the view from America and the current government, Europe's 8 countries' government are potential enemy, potential to become the left against the right. So that's why this is not comfortable. So, for example, the Italian government is close friend of the United States. Hungary also. This country did not join the troops in the Greenland. So why? Because they are close to the U.S. more. No, that is the situation. This year is especially the midterm election, and President Trump needs to show the initiative to and create the image they are representative right and fight against the left. In this case, this Greenland issue is appealing point. They are fighting against left. That is really happening just now. So that's why the American attitude looks like a little bit provocative, showing the American flag on the Greenland again and again as SNS. Why America provoke? Because they are looking to the American voters, the right-wing American voters, and come on, I am the representative of your opinion. Something like that is, especially the election year, this is very important.
Thank you, Dr. Nagao, for sharing that. And Dr. Nagao, do you think that there could have been any other way that, U.S. or President Trump could have eyed Greenland, or he could have raised concerns about Greenland's sovereignty and safety and how strategic importance Greenland holds in any other way? Why the way he's doing it's so provocative, and it's like a bullying?
Of course, Greenland is important. I have already mentioned some, but this is missile route against the U.S. or submarine route against the U.S. or the trade route because of the ice is melting, and source of rare earth, that is also true. All of these rely on the Greenland. But during the Cold War, US-Soviet Cold War that time the European allies has a relatively big military, and America also has a big military against Soviet. So that's why the main battle zone is more western side. But anyways, even if that age, the line of the Greenland, Iceland, British, or Norway, these are lying as the main line to stop the Soviets' approach to the eastern coast of America. So now the more smaller military is deploying because of all of these countries shrink their military lesser than half. So that's why indeed there are much wider zones. No one can patrol. Patrol is not fluent like in the past, something like that. So that's why this is the area that they need to strengthen military power. That is true. And indeed, China is a new actor in this region. In the past, China is a small country not involved in the Arctic issue, but now that they are trying to buy the former U.S. base in Greenland, or they have already sent nuclear submarines, people doubt it, and in the negotiation with Russia, they have already got the right to use the Russian naval base in the coastline of the Arctic. So that's why China is coming to this region, because China need to deal with the U.S. They are thinking. Last September, when China holds a military parade, that time China's leader leading the Russia, North Korea, Pakistan, Belarus, Myanmar, all of the anti-U.S. group China is leading. So why China did not hide this intention is, of course, because China is arrogant. China want to be the leading country of this anti-U.S. group. So that's why China's attitude is very clear against the United States. They need to approach the eastern coast of the United States, and Greenland is a part of it. So that's why now Greenland is matter. That is true. And if the Greenland-Denmark relation is a little complicated and Greenland want to become independent, in this case, Greenland is a very small country and they accept more investment from China could happen. That is also true. So that's why in this Greenland, the future is uncertain. That's why America tried to try to take the Greenland to make the Greenland stable situation for the security of the United States. Something like that is the background reality of the US is thinking, I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao, for sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has urged Europeans to avoid reflexive anger and instead sit down with U.S. President Donald Trump to hear his arguments about acquiring Greenland. Speaking ahead of Trump's arrival at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Bessent has suggested that European leaders take a moment to listen to Trump's perspective before reacting. The statement comes amid rising tensions over Trump's repeated threats to seize Greenland, which is part of Denmark. European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron, have strongly condemned Trump's move, calling it new colonialism. Macron and others have criticized the aggressivity of Trump's tariffs, which he threatened to impose on the countries opposing his Greenland plans. Let's listen into what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has shared.
I would tell everyone, take a deep breath. Do not have this reflexive anger that we've seen and the bitterness. Why don't they sit down, wait for President Trump to get here and listen to his argument? Because I think they're going to be persuaded.
Now we move on to Africa. Sudan's military is currently considering a new proposal from the United States and Saudi Arabia for a humanitarian truce and ceasefire with its rival paramilitary Rapid Group. The Security and Defense Council, a high-level body including military officials and government representatives, is holding meetings today to discuss the initiative. This development comes as the conflict in Sudan continues to escalate, with hopes that this truce could provide much-needed relief to the country. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Dr. Nagao. He's joining us from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao, for staying with us. Now, what more can you tell us about this new proposal that's considered by Sudan?
In this case, we should focusing on the supporter of the group in the civil war in Sudan and Yemen indeed. This is the one side is Saudi Arabia and another side is UAE. So recently in the Yemen, the Saudi is winning and the UAE-backed forces is facing the serious situation. That's why Saudi and UAE try to reconcile their relation. And both in the past, both are the same side. So that's why they should return that original time. But it could affect the situation in Sudan. Because Sudan army is supported by Saudi Arabia and RSF supported by UAE. So if the Saudi Arabia and the UAE re-establish a relation, good relation between two, why Saudi army and RF continue their war without supporter is a situation they are facing. So now, last November, because of the Saudi Arabia asked the United States, President Trump intervene in this situation. That's why now the US and the Saudi, the proposal is suggested, and so Saudi-backed Sudan army must read this suggestion. That is the situation. So that's why it has moved. And if the UAE withdraws their support to the RSF in Sudan and another group in the Yemen, so in this case, view from the support, there is a possibility this ceasefire is a powerful ceasefire suggestion. Both sides need to agree. So that could happen now. So that's why the Sudan army expressed their will to check this proposal came from the US and Saudi carefully. That has happened.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. Nagao for joining us today and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Businesses in the UK, particularly in the hospitality sector, are struggling with new taxes and rising costs, leading to a focus on survival rather than growth. Property taxes for commercial premises will increase, with some companies facing rises of up to 115% by 2028. The rise in the minimum wage and new employment laws have also added to the burden. The hospitality industry has warned that many pubs and restaurants could close this year. In response, Financial Minister Rachel Reeves has said she's working on a support package to help the sector, particularly pubs, and suggested that it could extend to other hospitality businesses. Now for this discussion, we welcome Ms. Mitali Nikore. She is an economist, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ms. Nikore, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, Thank you. Thank you. Now, what more can you tell us about this? How is this affecting UK's hospitality sector?
So actually, we've been researching what's happening in the UK's fiscal situation for some time at my think tank, Nikore Associates. I have also been in touch with alma mater economists at the London School of Economics. And based on this research, what we can say is that, what the UK is experiencing is what we call in economics a very classic Laffer curve. So essentially, they are in a trap situation. The fiscal deficit is quite high, particularly the government debt to GDP ratio has crossed nearly 75%. And we're at that point where, they have no choice but to raise taxes in order to mobilize revenue. But the fallout of raising these taxes is that people are getting demotivated and people are thinking about leaving the UK economy. Anyone who can afford to or is able to, especially amongst the high income groups, is already doing it. And now with the new retail taxes coming in, the entire sector, which was actually generating the maximum number of jobs, is coming under the scanner.
Right. And Ms. Nikore, so how effective could this government support package be in, helping out?
So at this point in time, one really needs to think that what is the best way of financing the deficit, rather than thinking about sectoral support packages. Because while this particular set of taxes primarily, affects the hospitality industry and the retail industry, there are other taxes which are being raised in the UK to finance the debt. And I think at this point in time, what the UK really needs more than a sector support package is a debt restructuring package. They really need to see what are the different revenue sources that they can test out to actually reduce the debt burden on the UK taxpayer. And really, there are so many instruments that are available in international markets, for example, for refinancing government debt. But also the UK really needs to think about growth, because by imposing such high taxes, they are actually scuttling growth. But what they actually need to be doing is thinking about investing in sectors where growth is required. So I think with debt restructuring and borrowing and concessional financing, it might actually be a better idea as opposed to just giving sectoral support packages.
And building on your answer, so what impact does the UK's debt level have on many things, including investor confidence and both the government and private sector?
So if we look at the structure of the UK debt, that is where really the entire question lies. Is any country's debt, when we're looking at it, if the country's debt is largely held domestically, then investors are not that worried, because then they know that even if that debt is held domestically, the country can always print money and they can actually get out of that debt. However, in the case of the UK, the debt is not primarily held domestically. There is a lot of foreign debt that the UK does have, particularly with the UAE and China and Europe and the US. So therefore, it is important in this case for the UK to think about debt restructuring and work with its, work with the countries, with the lenders to actually work on this debt restructuring space.
And how could this high debt levels influence the Bank of England's decision on interest rates, also monetary policy moving forward?
So basically, when we think about monetary policy, the main rule of thumb is that we don't raise interest rates, we reduce interest rates when the debt levels become very high. But every time interest rates are reduced, it does lead to inflationary pressure. And what the UK is also experiencing at this point in time is a massive cost of living crisis. And food inflation is at an all-time high. So, in such a situation, the central bank is actually in a little bit of a quandary. Do you prioritize the rate of financing for government debt and for borrowings, or do you finance, some relief for the consumer by raising interest rates and then, controlling inflation? At this point, I feel that the Central Bank of England will probably go in the direction of actually reducing interest rates a little bit, but at the same time also thinking about controlling prices by improving supply chains. Because one of the levers of actually controlling food inflation and food prices is by bringing in cheaper imports and also reducing the cost of food production. So if the UK can actually bring in, European workers back again, or if they can have one-to-one trade agreements as they've done with India to import cheaper food products, then it can reduce food inflation as well as finance its debt.
And, building on your previous answer about UK's debt, a lot of it is foreign debt. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So if we look at the UK's current debt situation, we can see that one of the major, lenders to the UK is, of course, the US, because that is how the financial services sector works. And we see that a lot of financial services, are done on the London Stock Exchange. There's a lot of work that's happening in London as a financial hub for Europe, but at the same time, there's also import of financial services that happens from the US offices of many of these financing companies. So there is, the debt that's coming from there because of this reason. But then at the same time, there's also debt from China, particularly for currency stabilization. There's also debt from, the Middle East because of oil purchases. And those oil purchases have actually increased because now Russian oil purchases have been paused. So, there are these a few large economies, where the UK does owe its debt to. But at the same time, it's not as though the UK is not exporting a large amount of these services. So it can, if it increases its export of financial services in particular, it can easily get out of this foreign debt.
And Ms. Nikore, last but not least, how vulnerable is the UK economy now?
So at this point in time, with the current decision making that has been taking place, actually the entire issue is that in the last 4 or 5 prime ministers that have changed in the UK, nobody can seem to have a consensus on what is the recovery plan for the UK economy. There is a need for the UK economy to admit and realize that their growth has been slowing down for a few decades now. There has not been, a clear innovation on the tech sector. There has not been much innovation in any sector really in the UK, except for financial services. And London has, got all of the gains of that, with the rest of England actually being left out of this entire growth story. And that's where we see the hardships the most, in areas outside London, in cities outside of London. Plus, the UK has also been reeling with a massive immigration crisis, and they have responded to this by, increasing government expenditures on immigrants, as opposed to being pragmatic about stopping to take immigrants. So I do feel that at this point in time, the UK economy needs a very strong set of decisions. And, there's also a need for rationalizing expenditures, including social security, and keeping expenditures within, within the range of what the economy can afford.
With that, I would like to thank Ms. Mitali Nikore for joining us as an economist and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha have said that they will be welcoming their 4th child, a baby boy, in July. Usha Vance has said that she and the baby were doing well. JD Vance and Usha Vance have also said that during this exciting and hectic time, they are particularly grateful for the military doctors who take excellent care of their family and for the staff members who do so much to ensure that they can serve the country while enjoying a wonderful life with their children. However, the first son, Ivan, was born in 2017, followed by another son, Vivek, in 2020, and their daughter, Mirabel, born in 2021. Now we move on to our next news. French cosmetics giant L'Oreal has announced plans to set up a beauty tech hub in Hyderabad, India, with an initial investment of over 35 billion rupees. The hub will focus on AI-driven beauty innovation and aims to create 2,000 tech jobs by 2030. L'Oreal's CEO Nicholas Hieronymus and the Telangana state government formalized the partnership at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Telangana has quickly become a key investment and tech hub in southern India. Bilateral trade between India and France has reached $15 billion in 2024, with both nations working closely to strengthen ties and modernize their tax treaty, adapting to global standards on tax transparency. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Following US President Trump's threat of imposing 200% tariffs on French luxury goods, French President Macron has hit back at Davos, saying that he will not give in to bullies. Amid the escalation between NATO and the USA over Greenland, President Trump has again slammed NATO, saying he has saved the alliance from the ash heap of history. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has reaffirmed his country's support for Greenland and Denmark's sovereignty at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Venezuela's National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez has announced broad reforms in the laws amid the new political context following the capture of Nicolas Maduro by a U.S. military operation this month. US President Donald Trump expresses support for his Syrian counterpart Ahmad al-Sharaa, who launched an offensive against Washington's erstwhile Kurdish allies, saying a choir boy could not handle the situation in Syria. A video published by the U.S. Southern Command on X shows what they say is a United States seizure of another tanker in the Caribbean, the seventh ship apprehended since President Donald Trump announced a blockade to prevent sanctioned vessels going to or from Venezuela. Legendary American astronaut Sunita Williams has retired from NASA after 600+ days in space and a record 9 spacewalks, the most by a female. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is seeking to revive its case accusing Facebook parent company Meta Platforms of bolstering an illegal monopoly by acquiring Instagram and WhatsApp. Now for this hour, we start with France MP's visit to Greenland. 2 French members of Parliament have visited Greenland to show support and solidarity with the Danish Autonomous Territory, which is at the center of rising tensions due to US President Donald Trump's push to acquire it. The MPs, including Pierre-Alexandre Anglade, chair of the European Affairs Committee, has emphasized the importance of respecting Greenland's sovereignty. The mayor of Nuuk has shared that the support was deeply meaningful for Greenland's people during this stressful time. This visit comes after France and other European nations have expressed strong opposition to Trump's Greenland plans, highlighting the growing international rift over the territory's future. Let's hear what French MP and Nuuk Mayor Avarag Olsen has shared.
It's a lot of stressful. It's a very stressful time for the inhabitants of Nuuk, but also for the rest of Greenland. And knowing that the rest of the world is coming with support, giving us some kind of support is just very, very meaningful.
For us, it's very important to be with you today and show some support and solidarity, respect for your sovereignty.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Rohan Gunratna. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor Gunratna, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, as tensions escalate over Greenland and continue, what do you think? What is France's role in, showing solidarity with Denmark and Greenland?
Asuma, France is the most powerful nation in the European Union. And if you take Europe as a whole, that is UK and continental Europe, UK is the most powerful entity in Europe. But when it comes to the European Union, France leads the way. So the decision taken by the French to oppose President Trump's desire to annex Greenland itself is an indication of the thinking of the European leaders. So whatever France does in the context of Greenland is so telling. It is a message for everyone else.
And looking at EU as a traditional ally of US, do you think that this rift between US and EU, is it widening because of President Trump's, President Trump eyeing Greenland, or do you think it was always there, but it was just maybe under the rug?
You are right that Trump had an interest in Greenland even before he became president, but now it is very visible. And I believe that it is going to damage the transatlantic partnership, that is the relationship between the United States and Europe. And what is so important is, without getting into a confrontation with Trump, for the European leaders to work together with Trump to satisfy some of the security concerns. That is at least some of the key security concerns Trump has about Greenland. He wants greater capabilities based in Greenland. Yes, that is something that can be done to monitor what is happening in the Arctic. In terms of resources, again, it is a matter of partnership. So US and Europe, or the Anglo-Saxon world, they have very close alliances, a number of alliances. One is called the Five Eyes countries, that is Australia, Canada, UK, US, New Zealand. Another is NATO, and there are many other partnerships. All that will suffer, all that will be disrupted and dismantled if Trump pursues the Greenland option without consultation and cooperation and collaboration with the European counterparts. So at this point, the most important thing is you must put the best leaders to deal with President Trump, who is very triumphant. And also he's basically a businessman. He's not a classic politician, so they have to put the right people to deal with him.
Right. Ooh, the stakes are really high, as you know, you rightfully laid it out, all that for us. So building on security concerns of US, and you know, as Trump says that he's eyeing Greenland for the security concerns, couldn't he raise an alarm about Greenland or eye Greenland in any other way? Why did he have to disrupt the system? Why did he have to shake the ground like this? What do you think?
Trump's style of working is that he asks for the impossible and then he will negotiate something reasonable. Now you can see with regard to Gaza what he said. He said he wants to empty Gaza of all Palestinians. Now he came to terms working with the Arab countries, with the Palestinians, with Israel for something more reasonable. So this is the style of a businessman. So we have to understand it and put the right people to deal with it. If the Europeans have a tough talk with Trump will take actions very unilaterally. You can see how the Venezuelan president Maduro threatened him one-to-one, and his response. So he's a different type of leader that needs different type of negotiators to deal with him. So there are some leaders who have built exceptionally good relationship with Trump. For example, Netanyahu in Israel, Erdogan in Turkey, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, Field Marshal Sisi in Egypt. So some leaders work with him very well. Others leaders can't.
Right. Indeed. Thank you for highlighting that and sharing that with us on NewsX World. Professor, please stay with us as we come back to you for a later discussion as well. Now, moving on to our next news, US President Donald Trump has hinted at the possibility of involving Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado in some capacity to help her country, though he has not specified her role. In recent comments at the White House, he has expressed his desire to collaborate with Machado, noting his positive shift in perspective towards Venezuela. This change comes after his previous criticism of her leadership capabilities and popularity in Venezuela. Machado's party claims a significant victory in the 2024 presidential elections with a reported 70% vote share. Let's listen into what Trump has shared.
As an example, into the United States. That's why one of the reasons I felt so strongly against Venezuela. Now I'm loving Venezuela. They've been working with us so well. It's been so nice. And an unbelievably nice woman also did a very incredible thing, as you know, a few days ago. We're talking to her, and maybe we can get her involved in some way. I'd love to be able to do that. Maria, maybe we can do that. But we're dealing with the people and the president and all of the people in Venezuela, and we've been doing great. The oil companies are getting ready to make massive investments there. They have more oil than even Saudi Arabia.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Rohan Gunratna. He joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. As a few weeks ago, we just talked about this, or a few days ago, we talked about this, and you mentioned that this is a strategy that was used by Machado to present her Nobel Peace Prize to Trump. How is that coming in handy as we see the situation evolving in her benefit now?
Maria Machado is the leader of the opposition, but she's a very popular leader. If they have election today in Venezuela, she's going to be the next president of Venezuela. She got a very high poll that was neglected and negated by Maduro in the last election. So Machado is also very diplomatic. She presented her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump to win his favor. She's a real diplomat too, not only a classic politician. And today Trump has built a very close friendship with her. Trump also has built a good friendship with the interim president of Venezuela, that is President Rodriguez. So what is important is for both these leaders, both the interim president and the opposition leader, to work with Trump so that Venezuela will be able to transform into a very stable and a secure and a peaceful nation, because there are no US troops on the ground. It was the operation that Trump launched early January was operation to surgically extract Maduro out of Venezuela. Trump even didn't take the interior minister of Venezuela and bring him back to the United States, although he is mentioned in the US indictment for moving drugs to the United States. So I think that the key strategy is for Venezuela to work with the United States and to dismantle the criminal networks that are in Venezuela that led to this chaos and this disruption of relations, temporary disruption of relations between the US and Venezuela. Right now, looking at the statement that Trump made that you aired, it is very clear that these two leaders have been able to pacify Trump to the extent where he said, "I love Venezuela."
Yes, indeed. And lastly, as we saw media reported a few days ago about CIA's director of was visit to Rodriguez, right? So where exactly does U.S. stand, as we now saw that, and you rightfully highlighted that Trump's warming up towards Venezuela, and it seems like, to me at least, it seems like he likes both these leaders, Rodriguez and Machado. What's your take on this?
Trump's thinking is that he wants the Western Hemisphere, meaning Europe, meaning Latin America or Central and South America, to be within his sphere of influence. That is called the Monroe Doctrine. He doesn't want the Chinese, he don't want the Russians, he don't want the Iranians to have a base in South and Central America. And one of the key reasons he intervened is because of the very presence, very significant growing presence of Russian and Chinese and Iranian influence in Venezuela. So I think that Trump's thinking is that the Western civilization is under threat. The Judeo-Christian civilization is under threat. And that is why he's supporting Netanyahu, he's supporting Israel, he's supporting the European countries. And of course, he's deepening his influence in Central and South America so that Western civilization will not be challenged and will not go down. So one has to understand very clearly who Trump is, his ideology, and work with him accordingly. The reason he asked his CIA chief to meet with the Venezuelan leaders is that he doesn't want geopolitical interference from the Russians or the Chinese, or the presence of these drug cartels and drug networks in Venezuela, because that's going to impact on the security and stability of the United States.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Rohan Gunratna for joining us today and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus on to Japan. The gunman responsible for the assassination of Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment for more than 3 years after the shocking daylight killing. The murder sparked a nationwide reckoning in a country with limited experience of gun violence, leading to scrutiny over the alleged connections between prominent conservative politicians and the secretive Unification Church. However, Judge Shinichi Tanaka has pronounced the sentence at a court in Nara. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Asta Chada. She's an Associate Professor of International Relations in Ritsumeikan University, joins us live from Kyoto. Thank you very much, Dr. Chada, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, thank you. Now, looking at this, how significant is this court sentence of life imprisonment towards this, gunman who has been responsible for the assassination of Abe?
Well, I mean, this court ruling is extremely important, specifically if we look at the person, the accused here. He committed an act of violence, not just against another civilian. It was against the then ex-prime minister of Japan, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was not just very popular but also seen as one of those few figures in Japan. We know that Japan is in general a very, very safe country relatively, but in this case there were also issues with regard to security breach that were committed. The response timing of the authorities was also slow. So given all of this in the backdrop and the motivations of this individual to then target Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also seemed to be very non-political. He was doing this as an act of let's say defiance against the Unification Church, which he felt that Prime Minister Abe represented in some form. So given all of that convoluted backdrop, this decision that had taken so many years to come forth, the courts deciding that this man would be sentenced to life imprisonment was welcomed by people, welcomed by those that look at this act of violence in some way threatening that image of Japan being a very, very safe country. It is being welcomed by the supporters of Abe. It is also being welcomed by people who wanted a clear distinction made between the Liberal Democratic Party and the Unification Church. And let's also remember that back in 2025 in Tokyo, the government here in Japan also celebrated the fact that the courts basically asked the Unification Church to entirely disband and not operate on the Japanese soil anymore. So these developments have definitely taken a long time. There were periods where there was a lot of skepticism as to where this whole trial is going to go, because the arguments in favor of this accused were never to save him, because the accused had already accepted the guilt of him being the person that had attacked Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. But it was important because the lawyers that were fighting his case had pleaded that given his backdrop, given the fact that he was not politically motivated, given the fact that he had suffered immensely at the hand of the church, this individual's sentence should be reduced. So the court upholding its decision, that in some ways being celebrated by people here, is being seen as very, very important. And lastly, I must mention this judgment was given in Nara District Court, and that city had suffered in terms of its image of being a safe city as well, because that's where the incident took place. So all in all, I think it has had a very cathartic effect on people and the supporters of Prime Minister Abe.
Yes, 100%. And also talking about the Unification Church, what impact did the case have on public scrutiny of the alleged links between the conservative politicians and the Unification Church?
Since the beginning, when this individual was caught after he committed that assassination, his initial idea was that Unification Church had something to do with the Liberal Democratic Party, and Prime Minister Abe in some way represented the church in some capacity. What came out eventually, because there were a flurry of cases against the church, it so happened that apparently this church that initially has its roots in South Korea was formed, and then over time it had built its political connections with people in power. So though Prime Minister Abe was never officially part of the church as a member or even as an advisor, they never claimed so, Prime Minister Abe never said so, and there are no evidence of that either. But he did attend some events that were held by those that were affiliated in some capacity with the church, and that alone was seen as by this individual who was less informed was seen as, you know, an act wherein somebody in position of power has some relation, even though how much soever far it might be, it was seen as, you know, negatively harming LDP's image. So as a result of this assassination, what happened is all of these cases and accusations that had been going around against this church for decades, specifically in terms of the way they had been instrumentalizing, or let's say they had been using people's faith or using people's fear for getting money or extorting money from them in form of donations. You know, there were those cases that had been pending and didn't receive much attention, but after this assassination, all of those cases were taken into account, and it was found that this church had maintained that policy of over time, you know, using people's faith and fear to get money from them, sometimes even leading up to the bankruptcy of the individuals who were making this donation, which was also apparently the case with this this accused here in this case. The second important thing that came about as a result of this trial was also the fact that the Japanese government now needs to look very carefully at the second generation of the donors of this church, which is the people such as this accused person, because several of these kids are probably not followers of this church or never had the kind of religious devotion, but they were suffering the impacts of bankruptcy that their parents had put them into. And lastly, the court itself kind of rejected you know, any grounds for empathy or any grounds of justification of this person having a personal suffering and trying to target Prime Minister Abe, who was wrongly seen by him through some videos that were circulated online as in some way or some capacity linked to the church. So those three things, I think the way that they emerged, also in a broader context, bring to question as to what is the role of religion here in Japan, which is largely seen as a very non-religious society, and yet we see the operations of these religious organizations, whether they are the churches or any such organization that tries to extort money from individuals. That has pretty much become the debate in the past few years, specifically since this 2022 incident. So as of now, the church stands disbanded. We do not know what would be the next steps for this church or members of this church and how they're going to maybe in some way rally some support in one way or another. But what can be said for sure is that Japan is going to crack down, you know, with much more strictness when it comes to such actions, specifically ones linked with organizations in positions of power or organizations that could in some way exploit people and their victimhood or their fears in some way to extort money.
Yes, I really hope that's the case. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for sharing that insight. Now we move the focus on to France. In a dramatic move, French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has used a special constitutional power to force part of the 2026 budget through Parliament without a vote. Lecornu has invoked Article 49.3 of the Constitution to push the income side of the legislation through the deadlocked lower house after 3 months of discussions. This move prompted opposition parties, including France Unbowed and a National Rally, to file no confidence motions against the government. However, Lecornu and his government appeared to have gained enough support, particularly from the socialists, to survive the votes expected later this week. Let's listen into what French Prime Minister and MPs have shared.
Le Parlement ne pouvant pas prendre sa responsabilité jusqu'au bout que de donner un budget à la nation à cause malheureusement d'agissements sur différents groupes liés à l'action politique de différents groupes politiques ici qui devront en rendre compte devant les Françaises et les Français et devant l'histoire, le gouvernement engage sa responsabilité sur la partie 1 des recettes du projet de loi de finances pour 2026. Je vous remercie.
Je vous annonce donc que nous venons de déposer à l'instant même une motion de censure déposée avec le groupe communiste et ultramarin ainsi qu'avec le groupe écologiste et que nous avons décidé, dans le cas où cette motion ne passerait pas, que les 2 prochaines motions consécutives aux 2 prochains 49.3 seront là aussi déposées en commun avec un système de tourniquet. Ce sera donc la France Insoumise et Éric Coquerel qui présentera la première motion de censure qui sera discutée ce vendredi et qui peut-être sera la dernière du gouvernement Lecornu. En tout cas, nous l'espérons. Je le dis parce que...
Soit d'avoir, grâce au 49.3, un budget pour le pays ou de ne pas en avoir du tout. Eh bien, entre 2 mots, je choisis le moindre. Et le moindre, c'est un 49.3 permettant au pays d'avoir une loi de finances qui est loin d'être idéal. D'ailleurs, tout le monde le reconnaît, y compris au sein du gouvernement. Mais c'est quand même moins mal que pas de budget du tout. Je rappelle...
Alors nous rassurons le Premier ministre, les députés Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen et Jordan Bardella seront très fiers de s'expliquer devant les Français, de leur dire pourquoi on a refusé ces énièmes hausses d'impôts, pourquoi on a refusé cette énième aggravation du déficit et surtout cette très grave emballement, effet boule de neige sur la dette. Donc nous n'avons aucune difficulté à aller nous expliquer devant les Françaises et les Français. Je voudrais pas...
Now we stay in EU. The European Union has unveiled a draft proposal to phase out components and equipment from high-risk suppliers in critical sectors. The move, criticized by Huawei, affects companies with connections to foreign countries, particularly in China. The proposal is part of the EU's revised Cybersecurity Act and comes in response to rising cyber attacks and concerns over foreign interference. The Commission aims to secure Europe's technological sovereignty and improve protection of critical infrastructure. Huawei argues the legislation violates EU legal principles and WTO obligations. The new rules will affect 18 key sectors, including telecoms, medical devices, and semiconductors, and it will require phase-outs of high-risk equipment within 3 years. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines this hour. According to New Zealand police statements, authorities have ordered evacuations across low-lying parts of New Zealand's North Island after heavy rain and strong winds caused flooding, landslides and road closures, with police confirming a man is missing after being swept away in his vehicle. Spain's Foreign Minister Jose Manuel Alvarez said in New Delhi that a historic India-European Union free trade deal is likely to be concluded within days, with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen expected in India ahead of the January 27 summit to finalize the details, while India and Spain also discuss stronger defense ties. China has begun emergency flood aid to Cuba, with the first shipments of rice arriving as the island faces worsening food and fuel shortages after Venezuelan oil supplies were halted amid tightened US sanctions. China has condemned a suicide attack on a Chinese restaurant in Kabul that killed at least 7 people, including 1 Chinese national and 6 Afghans, with Foreign Ministry spokesman Gua Hyakun saying Beijing made urgent representations, while ISIS-K claimed responsibility for the attack as investigations by Taliban continue. Mohammad Nidal Al-Shar has met with India's charge d'affaires Renu Yadav in Damascus to push for stronger trade, investment and economic cooperation, including expanding joint coordination and boosting bilateral exchange. Amid the escalation between NATO and the US over Greenland, President Trump has again slammed NATO, saying he has saved the alliance from the ash heap of history. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has reaffirmed his country's support for Greenland and Denmark's sovereignty at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Venezuela's National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez has announced broad reforms in the laws amid the new political context following the capture of Nicolas Maduro by a US military operation. Alright viewers, let's now start with the news from European Union, whose chief Ursula von der Leyen has warned that the 27-nation European Union must move quickly to strengthen its economy and defenses in response to the changing global landscape, where economic and military strength are taking center stage. The European Commission President has stressed the need for Europe to move away from its traditional caution. Let's listen in.
We will need a departure from Europe's traditional caution, just like we did on energy, on recovering from the pandemic with Next Generation EU, or like we are doing now with defense, with SAFE, or on supporting Ukraine. The world is changing faster, so does our mindset.
Additionally, von der Leyen has emphasized the volatile situation around Greenland and the persisting Russian aggression in Ukraine. The European leader has also discussed the danger of strained alliances with the US, particularly in light of US President Donald Trump's threats to impose tariffs on Europe. She has said that such conflicts within the West would only strengthen adversaries like Russia and China. I now request Professor Wesleyan Popovsky to join me in this discussion. He is Vice Dean at the Jindal Global Law School and joins us right now from Japan. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us in this discussion. How do you see the statements that have come in from Ursula von der Leyen, a message that was long needed to be sent to the European Union leaders?
Yes, definitely. It's a strong message and it is timely. to make sure that all Europeans are very united in those challenging times, so that they protect Ukraine, but also protect their own security. They understand that they cannot rely anymore on the United States, at least until Donald Trump is president, which is another 3 years. So for those 3 years, but possibly longer term too, the Europeans have to get together. And they are already together. All Europeans talk in the same voice, and the Prime Minister of Canada made a very, very similar speech yesterday in Davos, in Switzerland, emphasizing that the middle powers need to be very cautious and need to be very unified to kind of counterbalance the United States, Russia, and China, the big powers' growing appetite, including territorial appetites. I think that's the correct way to look at this. If the Europeans get together with Canada, with Australia, with Japan, with South Korea, and other democratic and like-minded nations, they can very well resist any temptation, including by the United States, the largest military power, to undertake any aggressive acts. In fact, if we see the military, even the military, where United States is the strongest in the world, the rest of NATO combined is stronger than United States only. And for that matter, there is no chance that United States can do anything against the rest of NATO, because the rest of NATO militarily, in terms of even numbers of soldiers, of equipment, of armaments, is strong.
Professor,
So Europe,
the point here is that most of the European Union countries actually rely on weapons and aircraft from the United States. How is it going to do away with that kind of reliance on US for its aircraft and ships, and how much long is that going to take?
Yes, 2 points here. One is, yes, you are right, Peter, they rely on the United States, a long relationship, 75 years in the Second World War. But on the other hand, United States also very much depend on Europe. No, let's not forget that. But the power of the United States is mostly in the American global outreach, including in Europe. There are many American military bases in Europe, and that's also part of the American power. So if Donald Trump wants to fight Europe, he's nowhere, because America has little power only in the United States. Most of the power is in Europe and the other parts of the world. So Europe must produce its own weapons. So the message is very clear here. If there is no firm guarantee from the United States, Europeans can, and they prove, see how much new weapons were produced by even Germany, that has restrictions after the Second World War to develop any weaponry, has changed its constitution and now can produce very modern technology. And bear in mind that current modern warfare is no longer so much hard power. It's not much armory and tanks. It is very much intelligence, drones, surprise attacks. And here again, Europeans stand very well.
All right, Professor, thank you very much for your assessment of the situation. With that, viewers, we're now going to move on. Now, at the Davos meeting, Polish President Karol Nawrocki has spoken about the importance of diplomacy in resolving the Greenland issue, hoping that it could be solved through dialogue. He has said that solidarity within Europe is crucial, but building strong transatlantic relations is just as necessary. The Polish president has also addressed NATO's eastern flank, which is closely impacted by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Nawrocki has pointed out the need to maintain strong relations with the US, given the military presence of 10,000 US troops in Poland. At the same time, he has reaffirmed Poland's commitment to US defense technology, calling the US an essential ally for the region. Professor Wesleyan Popovsky joins us back in the discussion here. Professor, of course, clear division within the European Union countries, and once again Poland now supporting diplomacy for Greenland, also saying that it continues to rely on the US for a variety of purposes. How do you think the European Union nations can come together, although this is a crucial point that has come out from Poland? These are things that the European Union will need to sit together and address and work out, probably a phased or a timely plan to reduce its reliance on the United States, at least for as long as Trump is the president.
Yes. Poland is a big nation. Let's not forget that. One of the biggest in population, but also in capacity. It is very well capacitated because it's a front line against Russia. And Ukraine is the army of Ukraine is 800,000, one of the biggest in the world, by the way. Probably the third or fourth in the world in terms of numbers. So Ukraine, Poland, Baltic states, these are the front lines of NATO against Russia, and they have to be united and firm and strong. And they will. Over time, they will build the necessary capacity to resist Russian aggression. But also American possible invasion of Greenland. I don't think it will happen, mostly because not only Europeans, but even Americans will not allow that to happen. Let's remember that the United States has many institutions. It's not only Donald Trump. They have a Congress, they have a Supreme Court, and even the generals will probably advise Donald Trump not to take that lunacy to invade Greenland, which is a sovereign territory of Denmark. It never happened in history that one democratic country invaded another democratic country. Democracies usually don't fight wars against each other. They can fight war against non-democracy, but never between them. So for that matter, I don't expect Greenland to be invaded by the United States. Rather, there are attempts to develop some sort of security guarantee or security umbrella over the Arctic Sea. And that is possible, again, through cooperation. There is no problem with United States military bases in Greenland, if necessary, like there are everywhere else. But that should be done not through the language of antagonism and confrontation, what Donald Trump does, but through the usual dialogue and cooperation, and that can also very easily happen. This is absolute idiocy that if US doesn't take Greenland, the Russians and the Chinese will do. That's absolute fantasy and imagination. It cannot be done. Greenland is very well protected. It's part of NATO, and China is very far away. Russia is very weakened by the war in Ukraine. Russia cannot take Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. How can Russia take Greenland? This is absolutely idiotic statement by Donald Trump. So yes, to repeat myself, Europeans get together, they know what to do, they have the necessary strategy, the necessary capacity over time to develop unified defense.
All right then, Professor, thank you very much for joining me in this discussion with your assessment of the situation. Moving ahead now, viewers, a top Meta executive has cautioned on Wednesday against Europe's retaliation in the wake of US President Donald Trump's threatened tariffs over Greenland. Joel Kaplan, Meta's chief global affairs officer, warned that targeting the tech industry would be counterproductive and would not benefit Europe. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Kaplan emphasized that such a move would hurt European economies more than it would challenge US policies. Trump, who has proposed a US takeover of Greenland, was expected to push his controversial bid further at the event. Kaplan's comments highlight concerns about the potential repercussions for Europe's tech sector in the continent retaliates. Saul Satka, political commentator from Tel Aviv, joins me in this discussion. Saul, what's your assessment of Kaplan's comments? How much can European Union really resist without hurting its own tech sphere?
what the European Union might be trying to do is to promise the Trump administration a kind of mutually assured destruction, to make them know that if they do any kind of kinetic activity in Greenland to take it over, not only will that be the end of NATO for all intents and purposes, but they will pay a heavy price in terms of their economical benefits. The cost-benefit analysis and shifting that in the minds of the Trump administration is probably what they're up to. The problem for the EU and the Europeans in general is that over the past decades, they have let their military, their hard power, fall into a state of disrepair and penury as compared to the United States, which gives the United States, as the world's only true hegemon, the power to pretty much do whatever they want to in the case that they have a leader like Trump who decides to throw his weight around in a way that we haven't seen in the past 80 years. So time will tell what happens here.
All right, Saul, to continue to stay on with me as we proceed now, viewers, let's also tell you that China is warning the European Union against what it calls a deeper slide into protectionism. The reactions come a day after Brussels released a draft plan to phase out components and equipment from so-called high-risk suppliers. Those plans are set to include Chinese tech giant Huawei. Beijing says Chinese firms operate in Europe legally and pose no security threat. Huawei has also criticized the move. The proposals are part of revisions to the European Union's Cybersecurity Act, driven by rising cyber and ransomware attacks, fears of foreign interference, and reliance on non-European Union technology. The Commission has not named any companies or countries. Across Europe, security of Chinese technology is tightening. Germany has also launched a trade policy review and will bar Chinese parts from future 6G networks. Listen in first to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman had to say.
中方注意到有关报道，对此表示严重关切。中国企业长期在欧洲依法合规经营，从未危害欧洲国家安全，而是有力促进了欧洲电信和数字产业的发展，为欧洲民众提供了优质的产品和服务。
All right, request Saul to join me back in the discussion here. Saul, while the Europe is quite measured in, doing these reviews of tech from China, the question remains, is the European Union prepared with its own technology assets or infrastructure to rely on its own products, should it want to reduce reliance again on not just China, Russia, but also the United States?
The European Union's manufacturing base has been absolutely hollowed out for a number of reasons. I mean, the first reason is because of all the manufacturing that's been shifted over to China due to China's own protectionist policies, which have led to essentially flooding the market with cheap products that Europeans cannot compete with. At the same time, they're facing a problem from Russia, although they have cut off trade with Russia. But Russia ensures, for example, via its activities in the German political scene over the past decades, that Germany shut down all their nuclear power plants, making them entirely dependent on foreign imported petrochemicals. Because, of course, the wind and solar that they put up is no use to them, since they have very little wind and solar. It's not a sunny or windy place. So Germany has crippled their manufacturing capacity. So that's the second way it's taken it. And now they are facing a trade war with the United States. So the European Union trade situation, the manufacturing base, is facing a trifecta of chaos from all three directions, from its three primary trading partners, or what used to be them, Russia, China, and the United States. It's unclear how they can get out of this mess. And certainly the fact that they don't have enough power generation isn't going to help them at all.
So, important also to note here is that the US has also banned approvals of new telecommunications equipment from Huawei and also ZTE earlier in 2022, and it had encouraged Europe to do the same. Do you think the fact that Europe is progressing in that direction at this point in time is also due to the tariff threats and the threat to acquire Greenland?
Well, yes, absolutely. So Europe, as you can see, is now stuck between a rock and a hard place. Because on the one hand, they want to face up to America. At the same time, they know that the risk of buying very advanced technologies, the best stuff that China can produce, made by Huawei, puts them at risk of cyber security issues that they have no remedy for. Here in Israel, for example, 2 days ago, it was announced that various restrictions are going to be placed on Chinese manufactured electric vehicles. Not because these Chinese vehicles are not good, because they're fine. The problem is that no one understands what these computers on wheels have the capacity to send back to China. And in the event of any war between Israel and China, or rather an ally of China or someone that China wants to help, then Israelis do not know what kind of data will get sent back to Israel's enemies. And that same quandary applies to everyone in Europe. If Europe are buying all their high-tech internet equipment from China, will China have the ability to shut that down at will, or to cause problems, or to collect data? No one knows.
All right. Saul, do stay on as we proceed. Now, moving on, viewers, let's bring you some news from Iran, where Farah Pahlavi, the widow of Iran's former Shah, has said that there is no turning back in the wake of a wave of protests against Iran's clerical authorities. She has expressed confidence that the Iranian people will emerge as victors in the struggle. Having been driven into exile with her husband in 1979 during the revolution that brought the Islamic Republic to power, Pahlavi said her desire and need today is to return to Iran. The protests had initiated on December 28 due to economic hardship, escalated in January with rallies challenging the regime. A violent crackdown has resulted in the deaths of thousands, according to rights groups. Saul requested to join us back once again and give your opinion on the fact that, you know, the Pahlavis have been issuing these statements time and again when the protests were really at their peak and now when they're subsiding as well, but none of them have really turned up on ground. That is something that has in fact upset their followers in the country.
Well, if the Pahlavi family were to step foot on Iranian territory, they would almost certainly be arrested and killed. They don't have an army behind them because they have been out of the country for 4 to 7 years. At the time they departed in '79, exactly in January, they were not popular. The revolution against them was a union of people on the far left and Islamists. And the Islamists then went immediately and started killing the people on the Marxist left, as we have seen many times before. So while they were not popular then, the people who remember them are elderly at this point, in their 60s and 70s. They don't have an army of people who remember them. They don't have an organization on the ground who can protect them if they were to go there. So the request for them to go there, essentially to get murdered, it seems unreasonable.
All right, Saul, then thanks very much. That's all the time that I have. And now, viewers, moving ahead, there's some news from Russia, where a drone strike in Adygea region has left 13 injured, including 2 children. After hitting an apartment building, Russian air defense systems downed 75 unmanned aerial vehicles, with the majority shot down over Krasnodar. Meanwhile, in Oryol, damage was reported to residential buildings and utilities. No fatalities have been confirmed. Emergency services are at the scene in both regions. According to reports, the authorities have declared a state of emergency in Adygea. In the affected areas, cars were destroyed and power was temporarily disrupted. Investigations into the strike are ongoing. Meanwhile, Ukraine is also facing its harshest winter of the war as Russia targets critical heating and power infrastructure, leaving civilians in Kyiv and other areas to battle freezing conditions.
Саме найважче. По-перше, я дуже піклуюся про те, що мерзнуть діти, світла немає зовсім, або десь 18-19 годин немає світла. Коли немає світла, немає тепла. Тобто квартира замерзає, у нас в той кімнаті у нас 9 градусів було.
Обстріл у нас у малого ми долечували пневмонію. І це був капець. Тому що ми не знали, що нам робити. Холодина, як його лікувати. Ми вигрівали, як могли, надягали. І ночі то по очереді, то хто контролювали, щоб було одіяло накрите. А треба робити інгаляції. У нас там спочатку екофло таке було, і я підключала інгалятор, і якщо зробиш інгаляцію, то пол екофло нема сразу. І приходилось вибирати. Тобто ми от зробили інгаляцію, і все, нам вистачає там на декілька годин ще, і все. Ну, сиділи, свічки запалювали.
And viewers, that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Trump escalates Iran threat after assassination warnings. Inside presidential security measures. Historical attempts on U.S. presidents. Secret Service response to threat levels. Here's the multi-layered security system that protects U.S. presidents.
Hello, I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching another episode of Explained with me. Today we discuss the multi-layered security that protects US presidents from potential threats of assassination. But why are we discussing this now? US President Donald Trump has recently warned Iran that any assassination against him would lead to severe retaliation, marking a significant escalation in tension between the two countries. Now, this response is following Trump's previous sick-man remark for Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In an interview, Trump warned Iran that the country would be wiped off from the face of the earth if something happens to him. Trump was responding to the alleged assassination threats made by leaders in Tehran. This came as General Abolfazl Shekarchi, a spokesman for Iran's armed forces, earlier warned Washington not to take any action against the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. He added that if Trump were to do something to him, Iran would not only cut his hand, but also set the whole world on fire. Meanwhile, earlier Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi issued a direct threat against the US. He warned of firing back with everything they had if Iran came under renewed attack. So with renewed threats of assassination, what are some mechanisms that protect Trump from such threats? The US Secret Service, responsible for the safety of the president, employs multiple specialized units to ensure top-tier protection. The Presidential Protective Division, or the PPD, consists of elite agents who remain in close proximity to the president, ready to attack during an attack. The uniformed division guards key locations like the White House complex, the Vice President's residence, and foreign embassies. There are also highly specialized teams, including the counter-sniper team, which provides long-range observation and neutralizes threats, and the counter-assault team, or CAT, a heavily armed tactical unit designed for motorcade or site ambushes. Additionally, the Emergency Response Team, ERT, secures the perimeter around the White House. Together, these units ensure that the president's protection is swift, comprehensive, and formidable. When a president is supposed to visit a place, security doesn't start once he arrives. It begins long before. Secret Service advance teams arrive days, sometimes weeks ahead of time to prepare. They sweep locations, interview local contacts, and coordinate with nearby hospitals to ensure emergency response capabilities. Once on site, there are two perimeters: the inner perimeter, which is tightly controlled and where everyone is screened, and the outer perimeter, managed by the help of local law enforcement, ensuring traffic is controlled and crowds are monitored. These coordinated efforts ensure that no potential threats slip through the cracks. When the president travels, security takes to the road. The presidential limousine, also known as the Beast, is an armored vehicle capable of withstanding bullets, IEDs, and chemical attacks. It even has a sealed cabin and its own oxygen supply, along with a backup supply of the president's blood type. Accompanying this is a motorcade, a convoy of 20 to 30 vehicles, including electronic warfare jammers to prevent remote detonated bombs, and a control car for senior staff. When air travel is involved, Air Force One and Marine One take to the skies, equipped with flares to divert heat-seeking missiles and hardened electronics designed to survive a nuclear blast's electromagnetic pulse. But much of the president's protection happens behind the scenes, through intelligence and cyber defense. The Secret Service's Intelligence Division monitors thousands of threats each year, investigating individuals who make verbal or written threats against the president. On the cyber front, agencies like the NSA and CISA work diligently to secure the president's communications, including the so-called nuclear football, and protect White House networks from foreign hacking attempts. The Secret Service also has sensors in place to detect chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear hazards, ensuring the president is safeguarded from invisible threats. For high-profile events like inaugurations or the State of the Union, the security level is raised to a National Special Security Event, or the NSSE. During these events, the Secret Service leads the planning with crucial support from agencies like the FBI for counterterrorism and FEMA for emergency management. Military support also plays a role, with the Pentagon enforcing no-fly zones and providing specialized teams for medical or explosive disposal if needed. Together, these layers of security form a complex and dynamic system designed to keep the president safe at all costs. Now, assassinations of sitting presidents are not unprecedented in the US history. 4 sitting presidents have been tragically assassinated. The first assassination occurred in 1865 when Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., just days after the Civil War ended. Booth, a famous actor and Confederate sympathizer, shot Lincoln in the back of the head with a .44 caliber Derringer. Lincoln's assassination was a turning point in American history as it threw the post-war Reconstruction era into chaos, marking the first time a sitting president had been killed. The second assassination took place in 1881 when President James A. Garfield was shot by Charles J. Guiteau at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. Guiteau believed the president owed him a federal job. Garfield survived for 80 days after the shooting, but poor medical treatment, including unsterilized fingers probing the wound, led to a fatal infection. Garfield's death led to the reform of the spoils system and the creation of a merit-based civil service. Then in 1901, President William McKinley was shot by anarchist Leon Czolgosz at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in New York. McKinley was greeting the public when Czolgosz, hiding a gun under a handkerchief, shot him twice in the abdomen. This assassination had a lasting impact on presidential security. Before McKinley's death, the Secret Service was primarily tasked with catching counterfeiters. Afterward, protecting the president became their primary responsibility. Finally, the most infamous assassination in modern history took place in 1963 when President John F. Kennedy was shot in Dealey Plaza at Dallas in Texas. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for the crime, though many conspiracy theories about a second shooter still persist. Kennedy's assassination was captured on film, the Zapruder film, making it a highly publicized and studied event. It led to significant changes in how the Secret Service secures presidential motorcades. Now, while these 4 assassinations are well known, there are also famous near misses. In 1912, former President Theodore Roosevelt was shot in the chest while campaigning. The bullet was slowed by his glasses case and a 50-page speech in his pocket. Roosevelt, undeterred, continued to give his 90-minute speech before seeking medical attention. Another close call came in 1981 when President Ronald Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr. outside a hotel. The bullet bounced off the limo and punctured his lung, but Reagan famously joked with his surgeons, saying, "I hope you're all Republicans." Now, these tragic and near tragic moments in US history not only shaped the lives of those involved, but also changed how America approaches the security of its leaders. Now, an assassination attempt on Trump was also made earlier in 2024. Donald Trump was the target of 2 high-profile assassination attempts, prompting major investigations and a significant overhaul of presidential security protocols. The first attempt took place on July 13 during an open-air campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. A 20-year-old gunman, Thomas Matthew Crooks, fired multiple shots from a roof about 150 yards from the stage. Trump was grazed by a bullet on his right ear but was quickly shielded by Secret Service agents. In a dramatic moment, Trump pumped his fist towards the crowd, mouthing the word "fight" before being rushed off stage. Tragically, rally attendee Corey Comparator was killed while shielding his family, and 2 others were critically injured. The gunman was killed by a Secret Service counter-sniper moments after opening fire. Just 2 months later, on September 15, 2024, a second attempt occurred while Trump was golfing at his Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach in Florida. A Secret Service agent spotted a rifle barrel poking through a fence and opened fire toward the suspect, later identified as Ryan Wesley Ruth. Ruth fled but was apprehended shortly after in a neighboring county. Fortunately, no shots were fired at Trump and he was unharmed. Investigators found a GoPro camera and a Dear World note outlining Ruth's intent to assassinate Trump. Ruth was convicted on all federal charges, including attempted assassination. Now, these events led to a crisis within the Secret Service, prompting the resignation of its director, Kimberly Cheatle, following a heated congressional hearing about the security lapses. In response, the Enhanced Presidential Security Act was signed into law in October 2024, ensuring that major presidential candidates receive the same protection as sitting presidents. Trump's security has since been tightened with new tactics, including speaking behind ballistic glass at outdoor events, addressing the vulnerabilities exposed during these attempts. For this episode of Explained, that's all we have, but stay tuned as we bring you more in-depth insights and stories that matter.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous, and in the high stakes of theatre of global diplomacy, some territories are viewed as sacred sovereign lands, but in the worldview of the Trump administration, they are strategic assets waiting for the right handshake. Today we explore a transatlantic drama that has moved from the fringes of social media to the front lines of NATO. On January the 20th, the push for the American acquisition of Greenland reached a fever pitch. President Donald Trump has once again declared that the world's largest island is not just for sale, it is a national security necessity. And this time he claims NATO is starting to listen. Just hours ago, President Trump took to Truth Social to reveal a very good telephone call with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. The topic, Greenland. Trump stated, and I quote, "Greenland is imperative for national and world security. There can be no going back. On that, everyone agrees." But is there really an agreement, or is this the sound of NATO allies quietly bowing to pressure to avert a trade war? The battleground has now shifted to the Swiss Alps. Trump has confirmed that he will meet with various parties at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week to discuss the acquisition. Diplomats suggest that the Trump administration is using a carrot and a stick approach. The carrot being a seat at the table of a new Arctic security order, and the stick being staggering tariffs. To understand why Trump is pushing so hard now, we have to look at his recent attack on the United Kingdom. Trump posted a scathing critique of London's decision to cede sovereignty of Diego Garcia to Mauritius. He called it, quote, an act of great stupidity and total weakness. Trump argues that China and Russia only recognize strength, likening the UK's move to a security collapse that the US cannot afford to repeat in the Arctic. For Trump, Greenland is the antidote to British weakness, and he has bluntly stated that Denmark cannot protect the territory and therefore the US must step in. So how is NATO responding? We are seeing a fascinating shift. Over the weekend, 8 NATO allies, including Germany, France and the Nordic nations, deployed troops to Greenland for an exercise tilted, quote-unquote, Arctic endurance. While Trump initially called this a dangerous game, European diplomats are reframing the move. Reports indicate that NATO leaders are now publicly praising Trump's focus on Arctic security. By increasing their own military presence on the island, they are trying to prove to Washington that they can secure the northern flank without surrendering sovereignty. But in doing so, they are effectively adopting Trump's rhetoric that the Arctic is under imminent threat from Russia and China. Now let's break down the impacts of this real estate diplomacy. First, the tariff threat. Trump has threatened a 10% tariff on Danish and European goods starting on February the 1st, rising to 25% by June unless a deal for Greenland is struck. This has sent shockwaves through European markets, leaving leaders scrambling to appease Washington. Second, the erosion of sovereignty. By discussing the acquisition of an autonomous territory at a corporate summit like Davos, the Trump administration is redefining diplomacy as a series of land deals rather than treaties between equals. However, the people of Greenland are not remaining silent. In Nuuk, the capital, protests have erupted with banners reading "Make America Go Away." The Greenlandic Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen has stated firmly that the island chooses Denmark over the US, but the economic pressure from Washington is making that choice increasingly expensive for Copenhagen. In Davos itself, demonstrations against Trump have been going for the last couple of days, with protesters particularly angry about the warm welcome the US president is receiving. The general view among these people is that NATO leaders are moving to appease Trump because they can't keep up with his unprecedented rhetoric. The Greenland standoff is no longer a sideshow, it is a test of the transatlantic alliance. In Trump's global order, sovereignty has a price, and the Arctic is the newest frontier for a chairman who believes every base, every island, and every nation has a valuation. Joining us now to discuss this is Ben Aris, a former Moscow bureau chief. He joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. NATO Secretary General here, Mark Rutte, has characterized his recent talks with President Trump as very good, and several allies are praising Trump's focus on the Arctic. Do you see this as a genuine strategic alignment, or is it NATO engaging in a desperate appeasement strategy?
The latter. NATO is nominally an alliance of some 30 countries, including all the European ones. However, in practice, it's largely an extension of the US military policy overseas, and that it forms the backbone of the NATO's power is US military power. And that without participation or cooperation with the US, then NATO becomes a bit of a wet squib, a bit of an empty paper bag. And so Rutte is very conscious of that. And so he and his job and his effective power at the head of that military organization is all dependent on keeping Trump on board. And at the same time, on the other side of the fence, Trump's made it very clear that he's not willing to bankroll European security, and that the whole Article 5 thing is being undermined because he's introduced enough uncertainty that should, for example, Russia march into the Baltics, which are a military member of NATO, that America would not come to their defense. The collective security guarantee, Article 5, is in doubt now. And I think that's the problem for everyone here, is that the international apparatus of security in Western Europe, backed by the US, is falling to pieces. And that's a big problem for Europe in general, because they're warning repeatedly that Russia's going to, quote, be ready to invade Europe sometime in the next 5 years. But without the US backing them up, then the Russian army at the moment, there's 1 million men under arms. The Russians are outproducing the whole of the EU combined in terms of weapons and ammo, and that they would be defenseless. And without American help, they would be pushed to repulse such an attack.
And Ben, of course, the T word has been brought into this conversation a couple of days ago. We're seeing a 10% to 25% tariff ultimatum linked directly to a land acquisition. In the history of modern foreign policy, have we ever seen a major power use its domestic trade policy as a siege engine to acquire territory from a formal military ally?
Well, like you suggested in your preamble, I mean, the whole international order has fallen to pieces. That we're supposed to be treated, Europe, America as partners, because we have been ever since the Second World War, and building this unified world based on values, etc. And what we're seeing here is that Trump has totally abandoned that model, and he's been called transactional. But what he's doing here is he's taking economic tools like tariffs and using them for effectively military purposes to annex territory that doesn't belong to the states. And that's in total violation of the UN Charter. It's worse than anything that Putin's been doing, because he's then going on to put these charges on Europe. I mean, personally, I think you have to think of Trump as simply as a deal maker, and he's taking what tools he has in the box, and tariffs is one that he can hit Europe over the head. That 20% of Europe's exports goes to the States. It's by far the largest economic partner that Europe has, and is the biggest trade partnership in the world. And so these tariffs are hugely damaging to Europe if they were imposed. And it's a threat. It's a negotiating position, because Trump famously, Taco, he always chickens out. That he threatens these tariffs, and then they go into protracted negotiations, and some sort of deal comes out of it. And in the case of Russia, he's repeatedly threatened tariffs. In China, he's repeatedly threatened tariffs, and none of them have been put in place because it's a negotiating position to get what he wants. The difference this time is not about trade, as it was in Europe and China's situation. It's about the annexation of somebody else's country. And that's a whole new kettle of fish. This is a whole new game that he's playing.
And Ben, today he made some statements, and he cited the UK's deal with Mauritius over Diego Garcia as a catalyst for the Greenland acquisition. Do you think he's right now to view the surrender of overseas territories and military bases as a systemic act of weakness that invites rivals like China into the Atlantic? Is this the new world order that we're living in now?
The Chinese came out yesterday and said, please, Mr. Trump, stop using this fake China threat as a justification of your selfish goals. It's invented. I mean, China has no aspirations on Greenland, neither does Russia. In fact, for Russians, this is now an issue because they had no problem with Greenland, which is on their northern border too, not very far away. And now you're talking about putting quote unquote NATO or American troops building up inside Greenland on Russia's northern border. And this was exactly the objection they had to the proposal that Ukraine would join NATO, because then again, that would be Western missiles, that time on the western border. So what Trump's done is created a strategic problem, a security threat to Russia where none existed. And this is obviously going to bring a reaction on the Russian side if they go ahead with it. So the idea is a bad one from start to finish because it just destabilizes an already unstable world.
And by moving these negotiations to the World Economic Forum in Davos, the administration is treating the Arctic like a corporate merger. What are the long-term risks of shifting the resolution of territorial disputes from the UN Security Council to an invitation-only economic summit of billionaires and CEOs?
Well, it just highlights the point I just made about Trump being transactional and then using economic tools for his geopolitical gains. At Davos, it's the other way around, which is an economic sort of confab of the world's leading business people who are supposed to discuss like markets and access and trade and tariffs amongst themselves. And suddenly, the delegates are going to be not discussing. The theme of Davos this year is about quote unquote discussion. It's actually going to be a debate where you're going to have CEOs talking about territory and sovereignty and like who gets to control what country. And so here we've got business leaders doing geopolitics and actually having to worry about it because that's not part of their brief. And so again, it's part of Trump completely upending the whole international order and pulling in business and making business a political weapon for his geopolitical aspirations.
Ben Aris, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for taking the time. Well, that's all that we have time for on this episode of Deep Dive here on NewsX World. Stay tuned on the channel for more international news updates. Thank you.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines this hour. According to New Zealand police statements, authorities have ordered evacuations across low-lying parts of New Zealand's North Island after heavy rain and strong winds caused flooding, landslides and road closures, with police confirming a man is missing after being swept away in his vehicle. National Forecaster Service has issued life-threatening weather warnings. Spain's Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez said in New Delhi that a historic India-European Union free trade deal is likely to be concluded within days, with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen expected in India ahead of the January 27 summit to finalize the details, while India and Spain also discussed stronger defense ties. China has begun emergency food aid to Cuba, with the first shipments of rice arriving as the island faces worsening food and fuel shortages after Venezuelan oil supplies were halted amid tightened US sanctions. Furthermore, Beijing will send a total of 30,000 tons of rice under the new aid program. China has condemned a suicide attack on a Chinese restaurant in Kabul that killed at least 7 people, including 1 Chinese national and 6 Afghan, with Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Hiakin saying Beijing will make urgent representations, while ISIS-K claimed responsibility for the attack as investigations by Taliban continue. Mohammad Nadal Al-Shar met with India's Chart Affairs Renu Yadav in Damascus to push for stronger trade, investment and economic cooperation, including expanding joint coordination and boosting bilateral exchange. Amid the escalation between NATO and the US over Greenland, President Trump has again slammed NATO, saying he has saved the alliance from the ash heap of history. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has reaffirmed his country's support for Greenland and Denmark's sovereignty at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Venezuela's National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez has announced broad reforms in the law amid the new political context following the capture of Nicolas Maduro by a US military operation. Let's start with news now on NATO. Secretary General Mark Rutte has responded to US President Donald Trump's doubts about European support in case of a security threat. At the World Economic Forum, Rutte has firmly stated that European allies would indeed come to US's defense in case Article 5 of NATO's founding treaty is triggered. Let's hear that statement.
Said last night in his presser that he was doubtful whether the Europeans would come to the rescue if Article 5 would be triggered. I tell him, yes, they will. And they did on the 11th of September 9/11 in 2001, when for the first and only time Article 5 was triggered. I have no doubt the US will come to the rescue here, we will come to the rescue of the US, and we need each other for our collective.
NATO's Mark Rutte has also addressed the rising tension over Greenland. He stated that thoughtful diplomacy is the only way to resolve the dispute. Rutte's comments come as President Trump advocates for US claims over Greenland, a move that has stirred a major debate within NATO. Additionally, Rutte has reassured that behind-the-scenes efforts are ongoing, though public comments remain limited. Speaking on Arctic security, he has called for a broader discussion, stressing the importance of defending the Arctic, Atlantic, and Europe. Most importantly, Rutte has dismissed any fears that the Greenland situation could lead to the collapse of NATO. All right, joining me in this discussion now is retired Lieutenant Colonel Himanshi Singh, who's Defense and International Relations Analyst from New Delhi. Thank you very much, retired Lieutenant Colonel, for joining me in this discussion. Firstly, how do you see the fact that Trump is still asking for the European Union and expecting it to provide security in case of a threat when he himself has threatened European Union with his bid to acquire Greenland and the retaliatory tariffs?
See, we all know that what is happening around the world, especially on Greenland. So when this statement comes that Europe would help protect US, it's a masterclass actually. This masterclass has been specially designed for Trump administration, because we know that when 9/11 happened, Europe collectively sent their troops, their brothers, their fathers. They had gone to fight for US. So when US is becoming too greedy with Greenland, I think such a masterclass is needed. But you know, Rutte is attempting for 3 major objectives. First is ego appeasement of Trump, because we know Trump has been complaining that Europe is a freeloader, and by offering a concrete protection, Europe frames itself as a paying contributor and not a freeloader. Then there is a strategic denial. Trump's primary argument of acquiring Greenland is Denmark is too weak to defend itself from Russia or China. So thereby it endangers American security. But when Europe pledges that American assets are safe, and he removes this premise of Donald Trump's argument, I think if they say that they can secure island and US doesn't need to own it, he's making a big move. Then, militarily, if you see that this is a shift in NATO assets. Now we expect to see more naval patrols in the area of North Atlantic. New radar installations, which will be, maybe funded by EU and NATO, and common funds, not just Denmark, but everybody together. So they may create a permanent NATO Arctic command, so which will help in securing US interest also. And it is a very, very, thoughtful diplomacy is the way out, because one must understand why US specifically views Greenland as non-negotiable, because GI-UK gap during the Cold War, which is the Greenland, Ireland and UK gap, was the choke point for Soviet submarines. So in 2026, with the ice melting in the Arctic, I think High North is becoming a highway, and China calling itself a near Arctic state. Russia is already remilitarizing its north coast. So Greenland is no doubt a central cork in this bottle. So they are basically trying to de-escalate the situation and make, offers which are palatable to US. Over to you, Kriti.
All right, sure. Do stay on with me, Lieutenant Colonel, as we proceed. Because in fact, there's some breaking news information coming in. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to meet US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff on 22 January. The Kremlin confirmed the talks are on the president's schedule. Witkoff is expected to travel to Moscow from the World Economic Forum in Davos. He will be accompanied by Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law. Kushner has also been tasked with helping negotiate an exit from the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The meeting follows a flurry of diplomatic contacts on the sidelines of the Davos Forum. All right, requested retired Lieutenant Colonel Himanshu Singh to join me back in the discussion here. How do you see this meeting now? Should we expect any major breakthrough to come out of it? Because it's apparent how Trump has shifted his full attention on the Russia-Ukraine war peace dialogue, with his interventions in Venezuela and his bid over Greenland and his own domestic politics.
See, we all know that US is going to have its midterm elections in this year. So Trump is basically trying two ways of policies. One is inward and one is outward. He has to make the promises which he had made to his voters and the people who financed his entire funding for the election campaign. So he has to pacify them. Then he has to follow the Monroe Doctrine and the doctrine which is there by the Pentagon. So he's basically trying to manage both fronts, and he has already done a lot of damage by capturing the Venezuelan president. Ukraine war, it's more than 4 years, it's not over, which he had promised during his elections. And when President Putin had come to Alaska, there was no breakthrough. Zelensky has been meeting him and he has been getting humiliated time and again. But with this new Greenland crisis coming, I think Trump has more foes than friends. So this is a time where he must try and do something very concrete. I think this meeting with the Russian president will definitely have some breakthrough, because a 4 years old long war is not fruitful for Russia or Ukraine, because the point was that Russia never wanted yet NATO to come to its doorsteps. Now NATO's attention is somewhere else. So I think this is the right time, and already Italian premier had suggested that it is time to talk to Russia, not just Ukraine. So in the NATO area also, there are a lot of people who want now something very substantial to come out of these talks. So I think it is going to be a breakthrough, and we may hear a very good news soon by both parties and America reaching some conclusion. And I think this will definitely be a breakthrough.
What do you make of Trump's relationship with Putin? It's been marked with some layers of inconsistencies. He's always also threatened tariffs, while he's also maintained a cordial approach. How do you see that relationship? Of course, the US clearly does not see Russia as a threat, but where do you point out the inconsistencies that have remained?
Kriti, if you closely watch Mr. Donald Trump, he's not inconsistent. He has been following every word which he has uttered or promised. Most of the things were part of his doctrine. As far as his relationship with Putin is concerned, he personally likes Putin, but Putin himself is a very, very strong president, and he means business. So when two strong personalities, they clash, you know, whether they are friends or they are enemies or whatever, it is the war of equals. So Trump very well knows he cannot mess with Putin. Putin is a very smart, sharp player who did not react when the vessels of Russia was confiscated near Venezuela. He did not react. He is taking his time. Whether Trump puts more tariffs or he continues with tariff, Russia is least affected with this, because every time there is a war, Russian economy booms because of the equipment they are making, which is military grade and war related equipment. So Trump very well knows that he cannot mess with Putin, and he doesn't want to mess with Putin because he wants a strong Russia which can actually bully NATO. He wants somebody very strong, because otherwise the game doesn't become very interesting. So his personal relationship with Putin is good. However, they do not gel well on a lot of issues. And as I earlier brought out, that Putin's only hatred towards Zelensky or the Ukraine was that he did not wanted NATO to come to its doorsteps. So once NATO is diverted, I think we will have a breakthrough and Trump will be able to strike something more meaningful with Russia.
All right, do stay on with me, retired Lieutenant Colonel. Moving ahead, viewers, let's also tell you that in a tense escalation of rhetoric, President Donald Trump has warned that Iran would be wiped off the face of the earth if Tehran succeeded in assassinating the US president. This came in response to Iranian threats against Trump's life following an announcement of Iranian General Abul Fazl Shekarchi, who vowed that Iran would retaliate forcefully if their supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was attacked. In an interview with American media, Trump reiterated his previous stance, saying Iran's actions would lead to obliteration if they targeted US leaders. Meanwhile, in Iran, there are reports of over 4,000 deaths from violent crackdowns by government on protesters, with estimates reaching as high as 20,000. Amid these tensions, international voices, including Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi, are calling for targeted US actions against Iran's leadership. The situation remains highly volatile, with both countries posturing for a potential conflict. All right, I request retired Lieutenant Colonel Himanshu Singh to join me back in the discussion here. Lieutenant Colonel, what do you make? How is there any possibility of these threats turning into reality, or is it mere rhetoric at this point in time?
See, it is a very calibrated exaggeration and not an empty talk, because US does not need to threaten Iran a complete annihilation to defeat Iran militarily. This is more of a psychological threat. It means to deter the action before it occurs. Iran understands US military capacity, and the message is not the intent, it is the capability. So we must understand that Trump's statement that we will wipe them off from the face of earth is not a rhetoric, it is a signaling. And it's a classic, deterrence by punishment meant less for Iran alone, it is also for multiple audience, that is the Tehran power centers, the American allies in the Middle East, the domestic voters in the United States. So from military perspective, we know that US has overwhelming escalation dominance. They have their bases, they can control the sea, and Iran also knows that direct assassination of former sitting US president will be treated as an act of war. So crossing that line, even with proxies, Iran will not permit. So the response may not be symbolic. However, it may start using its proxies. So which I think is quite possible, because it is capable of doing so. So Iran's doctrine is not direct confrontation. Iran operates by using Hezbollah, Iraqi militia, Houthis, and cyber units. So this will allow Iran to harass without triggering a full-scale war. And Trump's warning is aimed as collapsing this ambiguity that he's telling Iran proxies that we will not allow you any insulation and we will kill you wherever you are. So geopolitically, this also assures Israel, Saudi Arabia and UAE, wherever these are the bases of America are there, that please do not be nervous. Even if Iran is expanding its influence post-Gaza war, at the same time, Russia and China are also put in a delicate situation. So neither Iran, US want any disruption in energy routes, but both want that this entanglement should remain free.
All right, sure. Thank you then very much, Himanshu Singh, for joining me in this discussion. And with that, viewers, we're now going to move ahead. Now, Egypt has accepted US President's invitation to join the Board of Peace Initiative, which aims to end the conflict in Gaza and address global disputes. Egypt's foreign ministry confirmed the acceptance, commending Trump's Middle East policies and expressing support for the board's second phase to end the Gaza conflict. However, Norway has decided not to participate in the initiative in its current form. Separately, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan discussed the situation in Syria and Gaza with Trump in a telephonic call. Erdogan expressed Turkey's concern for Syria's unity and territorial integrity and thanked Trump for the invitation to join the Board of Peace. Trump's plan for Gaza, which includes supervising the region's temporary governance, is concerns for many rights experts who view it as a colonial-style structure. Diplomats also worry it could undermine the United Nations. The board, which is chaired by Trump, includes figures like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. I now welcome Mohammed Osman, Middle East expert, in this discussion. Osman joins us from Cairo. Thanks very much for joining us, Osman. Firstly, let's begin with US relations with Egypt. What does Trump have to gain from Egypt, and what can Egypt really bring to the Board of Peace?
Well, of course, Egypt is a strategic partner of the United States in the Middle East region. This is a partnership that dates back to 1979. So it's a very long-term relationship that, even though it had its ebbs and flows, yet both sides are committed to cementing this relationship and maintaining it despite the challenges and actually disagreements, sometimes substantial disagreements on a variety of files, including at many points the Palestinian cause and the situation in Gaza. Egypt and the United States both played a very pivotal role in the mediation of the ceasefire in Gaza. Egypt led, along with Qatar, the mediation, especially the delivering the viewpoint of the Palestinian factions, while the United States, of course, negotiated on behalf of Israel. And basically, even though it is biased towards Israel, it was a mediator of necessity because it is the only party that is capable of applying any actual pressure on the Israeli side. So both sides, Egypt and Israel and the United States, are partners in the brokering of the ceasefire and the Trump plan per se in Gaza, and both of them are responsible for, along with other stakeholders, of course, for supervising its implementation. The Board of Peace, of course, is supposed to be the overarching entity that will overlook or supervise the implementation of the Gaza deal. It subordinated to it is the Executive Council, which includes several officials from several states and several parties in general, and also the Palestinian National Committee, which will govern the Gaza Strip. So Egypt accepted membership in this Board of Peace out of its commitment to advancing the peaceful settlement of the conflict in Gaza and to stabilize the ceasefire and prevent the situation from sliding once more into open warfare. Egyptian President Al-Sisi is in Davos, and he is supposed to meet today with President Trump on the margins of the conference of the World Economic Forum, and they will probably discuss the Gaza deal and the implementation of the second phase of the Gaza deal, and also definitely Egyptian-US bilateral relations.
All right, Osman, we've already seen how Trump has threatened to punish France for not accepting the invitation. Now, Norway has also rejected. What consequences do you think it can face, or any other countries that refuse to be part of the Board of Peace?
I think countries that are refusing membership, especially European countries at this point, are out of fear that the United States is attempting to establish this Board of Peace as basically something that will stand instead of the an alternative to the United Nations. And of course, this is something that the Europeans have great concerns about, especially given that US-European tensions have risen to unprecedented levels over the US ambitions or urges to, overt urges even, to annex Greenland. And the Board of Peace is rumored to be, it's supposed to be, it's planned to become an international organization, according to some sources. President Trump will launch the Board of Peace tomorrow and will reportedly sign a treaty that will launch this entity, which means that it will be a permanent entity, and it will not only be responsible or specialized with dealing with the Gaza issue. It will actually be a platform for conflict resolution, according to President Trump, especially that countries now that will join will have to pay a membership fee of $1 billion, according to the US administration. So it seems that the Europeans fear that the United States is trying to create an alternative international system that is unilateral, that does not uphold the consensus of nations with regards to international law and international institutions. So therefore, they have their skepticism and their fears about joining this entity, especially with the rising tensions over Greenland.
All right, Osman, do stay on with us as we move. Some more news now coming in. Viewers, China is saying its plans for a new embassy in London fully comply with international diplomatic practice and local laws. The statement comes after Britain approved plans for China to build its largest embassy in Europe. The UK government hopes the move will help stabilize ties with Beijing, but the decision has triggered sharp criticism from British and US politicians. They warn the site could be used for spying. China has rejected those claims. Its foreign ministry says hosting and supporting diplomatic premises is a legal obligation of the host country. Opponents of the so-called mega embassy are now pushing back. Some, including Hong Kong activists living in Britain, say the approval threatens their safety. They have vowed to take legal action. Let's hear some statements.
为外交馆舍建设提供支持和便利是东道国的国际义务。中国驻英国使馆新馆舍规划设计是一个高质量的方案，申请及获批完全遵循国际外交惯例及当地的法规及程序。
All right, I request Osman to join me back in the discussion here. Osman, is one to believe that the United Kingdom is not prepared in its own country to oversee any surveillance attempts by a foreign country, and that too from an embassy building?
I think that this resonates with the wider picture of tensions between Europe and the United States at this point. For years, Britain has refused China's plans for a new embassy in the critical downtown area near the Tower of London, near the financial district, and there were fears that this mega embassy building, which is very close and very proximate to some critical fiber optic cables in the city of London will be used as a bastion for potential surveillance and espionage, especially that China has refused repeatedly to hand over the full blueprints of its plans to build the embassy on the allotted land slots, claiming that this is a diplomatic mission and it is entitled to its own sovereignty and immunity per international law. And this is true, by the way. So they are not obliged really to offer all the details at the same time. So, but at the same time, the United Kingdom seems to have approved rather suddenly the building of the embassy at a time where tensions are rising between Europe in general and the United States. And it seems that certain elements within the European Union and maybe even Britain and Canada at the same time are making overtures to the Chinese side as a hedging maneuver in order to pressure the United States into backing down from its unilateral policies. President Macron yesterday spoke about the necessity of more Chinese investments in the European Union. Chinese investments in the European Union are modest. $60 billion, I believe, or $70 billion, and they pale in comparison, for example, to EU investments in China, which exceed $250 billion. In the case of the United Kingdom, they are even more modest, barely $5 billion of Chinese investments in the economy. So they want to attract Chinese investors. They want to also engage in a dialogue with China to remedy the huge trade deficit between Britain and China. So it seems that this is a step of rapprochement, so that China would be more open and more positive to engaging in actual dialogue with both the United Kingdom and Europe to counterbalance US unilateralism.
Okay, Osman, thank you very much then for joining me in this discussion. It was a pleasure to have you. And with that, viewers, we have some breaking news coming in. And now US President Donald Trump has in fact arrived in Switzerland for high-level talks in Davos. He is set to meet world leaders on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum. Trump has arrived in Davos in Switzerland for the World Economic Forum summit, and those are the visuals of Trump departing his plane as he arrives for the World Economic Forum summit. The visit comes as global leaders are going to discuss economic uncertainty, security challenges, and ongoing geopolitical conflicts. Trump's meetings are expected to focus on trade, global growth, and international security. All right, viewers, the fresh visuals of Trump arriving at Davos in Switzerland to take part in the World Economic Forum. He will in fact be addressing the World Economic Forum in a short while from now. He will also be meeting world leaders as Europe weighs a response to Trump's acquisition threat of Greenland. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has also said that the UK is letting us down by handing over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. And amidst this, US President has now landed in Davos. Earlier in Davos, UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves had said that she would never rule anything out when asked if the UK would impose retaliatory tariffs on the US. Remember, Trump's visit in Europe coming amidst his threat of tariffs on the continent over the question of Greenland. Trump has said that he will add a 10% tariff to goods imported from 8 European countries that oppose his plan to take over Greenland. And in fact, this is also coming as Trump has announced his board of peace for the reconstruction of Gaza, where at least 60 countries have been invited, but France was the first one to decline that invitation, followed by Norway. On Tuesday, French President Macron said that the European Union could consider a series of retaliatory options, including a trade bazooka that involves invoking instruments under the European Union's anti-coercion measures. The US presidential plane Air Force One has touched down on the tarmac in Zurich. And first on the day's agenda for President Trump is a reception with business leaders before he makes a speech